Jon Snow stood at the very edge of the world, gloved hands curled around the cold stone of the wall's ancient ramparts. Dawn had scarcely touched the eastern sky, and the air still clung to a midnight chill that felt older than the wall itself. He was dressed in a simple black cloak that marked him as a new recruit of the Night's Watch. But the weight of the cloak and the identity it represented felt heavier than anything he had ever borne in his short life. He was no stranger to burden. He had carried it for as long as he could remember. Yet, in that moment, he wondered if anything could compare to what he was about to reveal. He could sense Ghost at his side, the white direwolf, an ever-present embodiment of the strangeness that seemed to cling to Jon like a second skin. His breath misted into the freezing air. This place, this great wall of ice and stone, was meant to be the boundary between the world of men and all that lay beyond in the savage darkness. But as Jon gazed upon the vastness to the north, he wondered if he had crossed another boundary entirely, one that separated the ignorant boy he had been from the man he was becoming, perhaps from the man he was always meant to be. He had sworn his vows only a day past. By the standards of the Watch, he was still green. He should have been entirely focused on the responsibilities that came with a lifetime of service to the realm. But his thoughts were consumed by a truth so monumental that he could scarcely manage its weight. The secret of his birth was no myth. It was a reality branded upon him from the moment of his arrival in this world. The bastardy he had worn like a shameful brand was never real, and the father he had revered and tried to emulate was not truly his father. The knowledge had come in bits and pieces over the last moons. Most men would have dismissed it as madness, or the ravings of one who had spent too many nights alone with his conscience. Jon, however, had puzzle pieces that fit too neatly to be anything but genuine. More than the physical clues, the color of his hair that was dark as a Stark's yet sometimes shone with a faint chestnut glimmer in certain light, or the shape of his features that occasionally seemed out of place in Winterfell, there was the recollection of Ned Stark's voice quivering whenever Jon asked about his mother. There was the direwolf pup that had come to him, the white runt that should not have survived. Above all, there were hints from various corners of the Red Keep's corridors during Ned's time as Hand in King's Landing. Whispers he had overheard, lines in old books Samwell Tarly had shown him, half-clues gleaned from Master Aemon's cryptic remarks. And though Jon had only just been sworn as a brother, he was beginning to understand that knowledge was power, and power was as dangerous as any sword. He knew the world would change if he spoke the truth. He was not simply a bastard from the north, nor was he truly even a Snow. He was Aegon Targaryen, the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, heir to the Iron Throne and the living embodiment of a house that had been obliterated by Robert Baratheon's rebellion. He should have been an enemy to the north, or so many might say. But the same mind that told him to share this truth was also screaming at him to remain silent. To remain Jon Snow was, in a sense, safer. There were powers in the Seven Kingdoms that would sooner see him dead than allow a Targaryen with a claim to the throne to live. If he revealed himself as a Targaryen, even the Night's Watch might not remain a sanctuary. Duty, honor, family, these were the guiding principles by which men lived and died. Jon had revered them all his life, yet the very words that formed the oath he had taken, "I shall wear no crowns and win no glory," now seemed to mock him with their hollow ring. How could he wear no crown, when one might already be his by rights? Ghost let out a low growl, as if sensing the tempest churning in Jon's mind. With one last look at the frozen wastes, Jon turned and made his way down the steps that led to the courtyard below. The first rays of sunlight were beginning to creep over the horizon, illuminating the courtyard in pale gold. Men of the Night's Watch were stirring, layering themselves in black wool and boiled leather, preparing for yet another day of drills and patrols. Among them, Jon spotted Samwell Tarly, whose broad form was bundled in furs, leaning against a wooden post while trying not to yawn too loudly. Sam's eyes lit up when he saw Jon, and he waved him over, smiling despite the early hour. But Jon could hardly return the smile. His heart thumped with an intensity that made it difficult to speak, even to Sam, who was the only friend Jon had made so far who might understand, or at least try to. A swirl of half-formed ideas pressed against the back of his throat. Would Sam see him as he'd always been? A brother in black, a friend in uncertain times, Or would he see only the silver dragon hidden beneath the wolf's cloak? Jon needed an ally. More than that, he needed a friend's counsel. Before he could speak, however, Ser Alliser Thorne appeared in the courtyard, eyes narrowing suspiciously at the two of them. Jon's jaw tightened. He had never felt comfortable under Thorne's scrutiny, which was loaded with disdain for the bastard's skill with a sword, and maybe also for the easy camaraderie Jon had gained with the other recruits. But Thorne had no reason to suspect the deeper secret in Jon's chest. At least not yet. All new recruits to the yard. Thorne barked. I want to see how unprepared you lot are before you break your fast. Move. Jon could see a handful of others trudging to obey, eyes still bleary from lack of sleep. His expression sobered. Even if he wanted to talk to Sam, it would have to wait. Giving his friend a curt nod, Jon forced himself to concentrate on the immediate tasks at hand. The forms, the maneuvers, the daily routine that molded these rejects and criminals into something resembling men of honor. The clang of steel on steel soon reverberated through the frosty air. Wooden training swords smacked against each other with dull thuds, and every so often, a sharp cry rang out when a blow slipped through an inadequate defense. Jon moved with purposeful precision. His time at Winterfell had given him an edge over many of the other recruits, and Ser Alliser's hawk-like watch did not unnerve him. Each thrust, parry, and sidestep was something practiced dozens or hundreds of times. But the knowledge lurking in Jon's mind added a new layer to each movement. It was as though a different heritage guided his sword arm now, that of dragon lords who had once conquered continents. The thought felt both foreign and oddly intimate, as if it had always been a part of him, waiting to manifest. When the morning's drill was finally called to a stop, Jon stood amid a ring of huffing, sweating recruits, his own breath steady but his mind whirling. Ser Alliser dismissed them, casting Jon a glare that seemed to suggest he did not appreciate how easily the new recruit had mastered his instructions. Yet, for once, the jeers did not rankle Jon. His mind was too preoccupied with the quiet thunder of what he intended to do next. He found Sam leaning against a barrel near the armory, his face flushed from the modest effort of the drills. Sam offered a small, bashful smile that faded when he saw the tension in Jon's eyes. Are you all right? Sam asked, his voice a gentle hush that indicated he already knew the answer was no. Jon swallowed, struggling for composure. We need to talk, Sam. Somewhere private. Sam nodded quickly. In the bustling courtyard of Castle Black, privacy was scarce, but Sam had a knack for finding tucked-away corners and corridors that nobody else bothered with. They ended up slipping inside a storehouse, among barrels of salted pork and crates of moldy vegetables. It was hardly comfortable, and it smelled faintly of rot and damp straw, but no one would disturb them there. Ghost padded in quietly behind them and settled himself near the doorway, ears pricked as though on guard. Once the door was shut, Jon's pulse hammered in his ears. Sam, The words felt heavy on his tongue. How did one begin to speak them aloud, after spending nearly a lifetime believing he was someone else entirely? You're my brother in the watch, Jon started haltingly. And more than that, you're my friend. Sam's cheeks colored, and he gave a small, earnest nod. I feel the same, he stammered, adjusting his grip on his gloves. Is something wrong? Jon took a breath. I've learned something about myself, about my family. He paused, glancing at the floor. I've grown up believing I was Ned Stark's bastard, but that might not be true at all. The silence that followed was punctuated by Sam's asthmatic breath. Outside, the wind rattled the loose boards. Sam's eyes flickered with curiosity and concern. Jon, what do you mean? Jon exhaled. I mean, my mother was Ned Stark's sister, Lyanna, and my father was Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. There, he had spoken it. The weight of it swirled in the musty air, and in that moment, Jon's heart seemed to stop. Sam's face registered a series of emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, worry, and finally something close to awe. T. Targaryen? He whispered. His voice trembled. But that would make you a prince. Jon's throat bobbed. So they say. he said quietly, bitterness lacing his tone. I only know scraps, but I've pieced them together. Ned Stark never treated me like a bastard exactly, but he never spoke of my mother. He seemed to carry a guilt that went far deeper than fathering a child out of wedlock. It was the guilt of lying about who I am. Sam. My name might not be Jon Snow at all. I could be Aegon Targaryen, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. Sam sank back against the barrels, eyes wide. Are you sure? He asked, voice quivering with the sheer magnitude of what Jon was saying. I mean, there have been rumors, or at least I've read something about Rhaegar and Lyanna, but so many rumors swirl around that time. Jon forced a ghost of a smile. It's not just rumor. Old Master Aemon dropped hints that all but confirmed it. And with your help, the books you found, the puzzle pieces fit too well, Sam. I believe it. The question is, what do I do with it now? Sam looked at Jon with something akin to pity. You've taken the black, he said quietly. You've renounced all titles and inheritance. The oath says. I know what the oath says. Jon cut in, frustration seeping into his tone. But the realm is in chaos, and the threat of the others is real. We'll need unity to stand against the darkness beyond the wall. Suppose the realm discovers a legitimate Targaryen heir stands among the Black brothers. Some would flock to my banner, others would call for my head. I could be the unifier or the cause of a new war. But do I have the right to hide this, Sam? Should I? Sam swallowed hard, adjusting his weight as if the question were physically pressing upon him. Well, the Seven Kingdoms have a new king, King Joffrey, though some say he's not the rightful heir either. There's talk that King Stannis or King Renly might press claims. If you declare yours, if you are truly Rhaegar's son, the entire realm could shift. But it would also put a target on your back. If the Lannisters learn of this, they'll see you as a threat. If the Baratheons learn of this, they might see you as the last Targaryen that needs to be crushed. And what about Daenerys Targaryen across the Narrow Sea, if she's still alive? Are you prepared for the consequences, Jon? Jon lifted a hand to his brow, rubbing away the tension that throbbed there. I don't know, Sam. But I do know that living a lie doesn't sit well with me. And this isn't just my secret. It's something that could shape the entire war, the entire future. Sam nodded, clearly overwhelmed. He glanced at Ghost, who watched them quietly, red eyes glowing in the dim light. If you plan to reveal this, you shouldn't do it alone. You'd need powerful allies. Lord Commander Mormont, perhaps. He's an honorable man, but how would he react if you tell him you're a Targaryen? Could that overshadow your Night's Watch oath? The Lord Commander might feel honor-bound to inform the realm, or he might try to protect you. It's impossible to know. A heavy sigh slipped from Jon's lips. He swore me to the Night's Watch, he said. He might hold me to that oath, or he might see me as a potential tool or threat. I don't want to be used. But everything in my life is so tangled in this lie that Ned Stark maintained for love. Love of his sister and my mother. Jon's eyes grew distant, imagining the fury that would erupt if he told the truth. Noble families might scramble to align themselves with him or to kill him. The men of the Night's Watch would suddenly find themselves housing a potential claimant to the Iron Throne. Jeor Mormont was old enough to recall Robert's rebellion. The old bear might view a Targaryen presence at the wall as a sign from the gods or a threat to the Watch's neutrality. And even if Mormont was sympathetic, revealing the truth was a risk of immeasurable proportions. I need to think, Jon said at last, noticing the anxious flutter in Sam's eyes. But I wanted you to know, Sam, because I trust you, because you deserve the truth, and I need your counsel. Sam's hand trembled slightly as he reached for Jon's shoulder. I thank you. I'll help in any way I can, but I hardly know how except with books. Maybe we can keep reading, find out more about Targaryen bloodlines, or about what might happen if a Targaryen joins the Watch. We can be careful. But if you do choose to reveal it, I'll stand by you, Jon. I promise. Ghost let out a soft whine, as though echoing Sam's promise. Jon gave a tight nod, breathing a little more easily for having said it aloud. He clapped Sam on the arm and murmured his thanks. Then they slipped back into the main corridors. Jon parted ways with Sam near the dining hall, where men were gathering to break their fast on stale bread and watery ale. His thoughts were still muddled with the enormity of what he carried. It was a relief when he finally managed to slip away to his cell, a simple chamber of cold stone with a small bed and a single window. He sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. The vow he had taken was already complicated enough, binding him to a brotherhood that demanded he forsake all ties. But Targaryen blood was not so easily cast aside. It pulsed with the potential to reshape the realm. A swirl of memory invaded him. Stories of Aegon the Conqueror, who had forged the 7 kingdoms into one. Stories of Rhaegar Targaryen, who was said to be a warrior and a dreamer both. Was that the legacy Jon was meant to fulfill? Or had he, in taking his oath, forsworn that destiny forever? Hours passed with the slow shuffle of men outside his door, the distant clang of steel, the muffled shouts of training. When the next watch bell tolled, Jon rose. He had made a decision or something close to it. With one hand on the hilt of Longclaw, an heirloom of House Mormont gifted to him by the Lord Commander, he stepped out of his cell and made his way through the long, drafty corridors until he reached the Lord Commander's solar. The old bear was seated behind a sturdy oak desk, scribbling notes on a piece of parchment by candlelight, even though the day was bright outside. He looked up when Jon entered, eyebrows lifting in mild surprise. "Jon, I thought you'd be out in the yard with the others." He set aside his quill, folding his hands on the desk. Jon bowed his head, closing the door carefully behind him. "Lord Commander, I beg a private audience, if you'll permit it." Mormont eyed him critically. Then, in a gesture of dismissal toward the guards near the entry, he grunted, "Out. This lad and I have words to speak." The guards left, and Mormont gestured for Jon to approach. Jon moved forward, trying to still the quiver in his limbs. The Lord Commander was a man of straightforward principle, known for his unwavering commitment to the Watch. While not unkind, he valued discipline over sentiment. How would he react to the knowledge that one of his newest recruits was no bastard of Winterfell, but a Targaryen? That alone was enough to tarnish him in the eyes of many in the north. But Mormont was no fool. He was not blinded by dogma. Perhaps that was reason enough to hope that the man might understand. "Speak," Mormont said, sitting back in his chair. "I've got 1,000 duties to see to before sunset. Best not to mince words." Jon inhaled slowly. This was the moment. "Lord Commander, I've come to you because I carry a burden, a truth I've only recently confirmed. I believe you have a right to know." Mormont's head tilted slightly. "Go on." Jon braced himself. "My mother was Lyanna Stark. My father was Prince Rhaegar Targaryen." The words echoed in his own head like a death knell. "I was hidden at birth to protect me from Robert Baratheon's wrath, but it's the truth nonetheless. Ned Stark was my uncle, not my father." A stunned silence filled the room. Mormont's expression shifted from puzzlement to shock, then to something else entirely, perhaps calculation. After a moment, he let out a long, measured breath. "Targaryen," he repeated quietly. "Are you certain of this, boy?" Jon nodded firmly. "I am, my lord. I've no desire to lie, and I would not risk your trust on a baseless rumor. But it's more than rumor. It's consistent with everything I've learned, and I believe Master Aemon suspected as well, though he never said it outright." At the mention of Master Aemon, Mormont grunted. Aemon is a Targaryen himself, old as the wall and wise besides. Perhaps he suspected. The Lord Commander's gaze was piercing. "I see no reason why you would concoct such a tale, but it's a hell of a secret to keep. Why tell me now?" Jon's hand tightened on the hilt of Longclaw. "Because I've taken the black. I owe my loyalty to the Watch, and I cannot serve you or my brothers while living a lie that might imperil all of us if it came out in the wrong way. I'd rather you hear it from me than from some rumor that seeps through the cracks." Mormont nodded slowly, regarding Jon with an expression that was strangely respectful. "You've got sense and courage. This is no small admission." He exhaled, running a hand through the thick white hair on his head. "If you are who you say you are, You've got a claim to the Iron Throne that would make half the lords of Westeros rise up in arms. The other half might conspire to kill you to keep it from happening. And what does that mean for the Night's Watch? We're meant to be above the squabbles of kings, but a Targaryen among our ranks is no trifling thing. Jon felt a swirl of shame and pride, each at war within him. I've sworn my life to the Watch, he said, voice raw. I have no intention of breaking that vow. I'm not here to claim a throne. The realm has plenty of kings and claimants as it is, and that war does not concern me. My concern is the threat we face beyond the wall, the Whites and the White Walkers, and everything else that stirs in the far north. But I thought you should know, so that if the time comes when the realm or the crown seeks to meddle, we can face it honestly. Mormont leaned forward on his desk, steepling his fingers. I appreciate that. Yet you must realize, if word of this spreads, the Lannisters, the Baratheons, everyone might see you as a threat, and that would put you and all of us at risk. The Night's Watch cannot afford to be drawn into the squabbles of the Seven Kingdoms. We have a higher purpose. Jon nodded, the tension coiling again in his chest. I know. That's why I came to you first. I'm not sure how to proceed, Lord Commander. Should I keep this to myself, try to bury it so deep that not even my brothers suspect? Or do we make it known? My vow says I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. But what if the realm needs the unity a true Targaryen heir might provide? The Lord Commander was silent for a time, gazing at the candle's flickering flame. Finally, he sighed. A question for the ages, lad. If you truly are the rightful king, then your vow conflicts with that birthright. Yet the Watch has had men of royal blood before. We do not forbid princes from joining. But once they join, they are no longer princes. They are black brothers. No more, no less. Jon considered this. Aye, that is what our vow states. And yet the vow does not address what happens when the realm is imperiled, not just by a foreign invasion or usurpers, but by something monstrous that walks in the night. If the realm discovered a Targaryen is still alive, would it unite people against the true threat, or would it simply spark more chaos? Mormont's gaze hardened. More likely chaos from where I stand. If you want my counsel, boy, it is this. Keep this close to your chest for now. Let your true name be known to as few as possible. Master Aemon may help you come to terms with what it means to be Targaryen and a black brother. But for the moment, the Night's Watch can ill afford to become the eye of a storm. Our resources are thin. Winter is coming, and the White Walkers are stirring. The men of Westeros must set aside their petty crowns and unify, but they have not. And if they learn of you, I doubt it will push them to unify. It will push them to draw swords anew. Jon listened, each word forging a link in a chain of logic he could not deny. So you advise me to remain silent? Aye, at least for now, Mormont replied. Grow in the Watch. Earn the respect of your brothers. Show them your worth not as a prince but as a ranger, a man of the black. When the time is right, if it ever comes, then you may decide whether to reveal yourself. But speak no rash words in the meantime. Jon's shoulders sagged with the weight of what he heard. It was likely the wisest course, the one that would protect the Watch and Jon himself from immediate ruin. But it tasted of betrayal somehow to hide the truth. Still, he bowed his head. I understand. I'll heed your counsel, Lord Commander. Mormont nodded, then fixed Jon with a steadfast glare. One more thing, Snow, if that is still what you choose to call yourself. Targaryen or not, you are a sworn brother. You'll earn your place here by your deeds and your loyalty. Worry less about crowns and more about the duty at hand. Am I clear? Yes, Lord Commander, Jon said simply, feeling a surge of conflicting emotions. Good, Mormont said. Now off with you. There's work to be done and a watch to keep. Jon bowed, heart pounding, and exited into the corridor. His skin felt clammy as if he'd just stepped from a frigid bath. The tension that had built up in his body only slowly ebbed away. He still felt the enormity of his revelation settling in his bones. Yet at least now he was not alone with this. The Lord Commander knew, and so did Sam, and both had promised, in their own ways, to stand with him. The next step was uncertain. He only knew he must continue his life in the Watch, honing his skills, proving his loyalty. Whatever future was meant for him would reveal itself in time, if the others did not kill them all first. That same day, as dusk began to paint the sky in indigo and rose, Jon found himself walking the wall once more. The swirling night air buffeted him, and Ghost padded silently at his side. Jon gazed northward, recalling the tales of the children of the forest, the giants, and the others. He felt the prickle of gooseflesh on his arms at the memory of dead men rising, the fear that had swept the far edges of the realm. Far more than the squabbles of kings, that was the true threat. But how could men be made to see it, when all they knew was the Game of Thrones? He looked down at Ghost, who raised his red eyes to him. The bond he felt with Ghost was deeper than companionship. It reminded him that he was a Stark as well as a Targaryen, if not in name then at least in spirit. A strange hybrid of wolf and dragon. Did that make him more or less than either? It was impossible to say. "We'll keep our secrets, boy," he muttered to the direwolf. But for how long? He could almost imagine Ghost answering with a silent tilt of his head. Jon swallowed the questions lingering on his tongue. They would remain unanswered for now, lost to the bitter wind that howled over the top of the wall. In the days that followed, Jon walked a precarious path. He kept to his training, rose each morning to endure the relentless drills under Ser Alliser Thorne's scornful eye, and spent his nights either on watch atop the wall or sneaking moments with Sam in the library, poring over old tomes that might shed more light on Targaryen history. Whenever possible, he visited Master Aemon, who was as cryptic as ever. The aged maester never directly confirmed Jon's suspicion, but his pointed questions and the gentle sorrow in his blind eyes suggested he knew more than he let on. He offered no explicit guidance, only that knowledge was both a gift and a terrible burden. For a time, that was enough to keep Jon's mind from bursting under the secret he carried. But the tension in Castle Black began to crackle with each raven that arrived from the south, bearing news of fresh chaos. King Robert was dead. Lord Eddard Stark had been executed for treason. War had erupted in the Seven Kingdoms, with Robb Stark declared king in the north, and Joffrey Baratheon holding King's Landing, while Stannis and Renly both vied for the Iron Throne. Each letter was another blow, a testament to the realm's fracturing. Jon reeled at the news of Ned Stark's death, tears burning in his eyes as he tried to reconcile the man who had raised him with the same man who had quietly harbored the greatest secret of Jon's life. He felt anger and grief, swirling into a single point of pain that cut deeper than any sword. If Ned Stark was not truly his father, did that lessen his grief? No. He missed him as fiercely as any true son would. When word came that Robb Stark had rallied the North to fight for vengeance, Jon's heart clenched. Perhaps in another life, he might have ridden at his brother's side. But here he stood, clad in black, sworn to serve at the edge of the world. Even if he had not discovered his Targaryen blood, his vow would have kept him from that war. Now, with the knowledge that Ned was really his uncle, he felt an even keener divide. Part of him longed to ride south, to tell Robb the truth, to stand with the North not just as a half-brother but as the son of their beloved aunt. Would Robb welcome him, or scorn him as a Targaryen? With each passing day, the rumors grew darker. Lords were dying, castles changing hands, and the small folk were caught in the crossfire. The Lannisters were rumored to be forging alliances, cutting down any who resisted. Tyrion Lannister served as Hand of the King, or so the Ravens said, but no one knew how that might affect the war. Meanwhile, the name Targaryen was whispered in corners, mostly in reference to Daenerys Targaryen across the Narrow Sea, who some claimed had hatched 3 dragons from petrified eggs. Jon's ears perked whenever he heard that rumor, a faint tremor passing through him at the idea of living dragons. If Daenerys was truly alive and commanding dragons, what was her claim compared to his own? They were family, albeit distant. Would she see him as a rival or an ally? The Lord Commander offered no further advice. He was preoccupied with the threat of the wildlings banding together under Mance Rayder, the so-called King Beyond the Wall. Whispers of ancient evil in the far north also persisted, sending a chill through every brother who heard. It was in this chaotic swirl that Jon found himself on another watch atop the wall late one evening, with Sam at his side for the night shift. The torchlight flickered in the wind, and the wall's surface gleamed with layers of frost. Jon stared out at the darkness. "I wonder how my family fares," he murmured half to himself. "Sansa's captive, Arya's missing, Robb's marching to war, Bran and Rickon are in Winterfell. And none of them know the truth." Sam turned his head, cheeks puffed out in sympathy. "They love you, Jon. Whether you were born a Stark or not, they only ever knew you as their brother. That hasn't changed, has it?" Jon shook his head, but his expression remained conflicted. "I don't know. Perhaps not. But they don't know I'm a Targaryen. If that were revealed, would it change how they see me? The Targaryens were the enemies of the Starks not so long ago. My father, Rhaegar, killed many Northerners in the war, or so the stories say." He paused, recalling the contradictory accounts of Rhaegar Targaryen. A learned, gracious man who loved music and prophecy, yet also the one who fought and died at the Trident. And yet Ned kept me safe. He must have believed in Rhaegar's innocence, or at least believed in the love Rhaegar had for Lyanna. Sam fiddled nervously with the gloves in his hands. "If only they knew that your existence alone was proof of a different story. Maybe that would matter, maybe it wouldn't. But I can understand your concern." He hesitated. "Jon, if the situation in the realm becomes dire, do you think you'll reveal yourself to rally the North or others to our cause? If the White Walkers come, we'll need all men united." Jon stared at Sam, the question echoing an inner debate that had plagued him since he first confirmed his heritage. "Part of me thinks that might be necessary. The other part fears it would do nothing but sow further division. There are too many pretenders already, too many men calling themselves kings. I'd just be another name in the chaos." Sam nodded, biting his lip. "But you are the rightful heir," he said softly. "Maybe that does mean something." Jon said nothing. Instead, he took in the vast wilderness beyond the wall, where the black silhouettes of trees stretched like an endless sea. The cold air stung his cheeks, and he tucked his cloak tighter around him. He was the rightful heir, if he believed in the legitimacy of Rhaegar and Lyanna's secret marriage. Yet he was also a sworn brother of the Night's Watch, bound by oath to let all else fade away. He clenched his fists in frustration. So many swirling questions with so few answers. The next morning, in the gray pre-dawn, Jon joined the other recruits in the yard for sparring. The routine was as familiar as breathing. Gather, face your opponent, bow or nod once, and then commence with the dance of swords. Jon typically bested his partner in short order, and the men had come to expect that from him. But this day, Jon was distracted, a subtle tremor running through his arms. He lost the first bout to Gren, who was so shocked by his victory he couldn't hide his excitement. The second round went better. Jon tightened his focus and outmaneuvered Gren easily. Still, Ser Alliser was quick to bark at him for his initial slip. As the day wore on, word spread that a new batch of recruits had arrived at Castle Black. Thieves and murderers, petty lord sons, and a handful of volunteers from the north. Jon paid little mind until he heard the name of someone who had arrived from the Vale, a distant cousin of House Arryn. The man was rumored to be well-read, a zealot perhaps, prone to rambling about the Targaryens. Jon felt a jolt of apprehension. A Targaryen zealot at Castle Black? Could this be a threat? He found himself discreetly observing the new arrivals from the walkway above the courtyard that afternoon. They were a sorry lot, mostly ragged from the road, but the Vale man was easy to spot. He was short, with a pointed beard, and he carried himself with a haughty air that belied his current predicament. Jon watched as he spoke in hushed, excited tones to another recruit, gesturing animatedly. Even from a distance, Jon sensed the fervor in the man's gestures. He looked away, wondering if this newcomer might inadvertently sniff out Jon's secret. With tension so thick in the realm and rumors of a living Targaryen queen overseas, it was dangerous for Jon to remain complacent. His misgivings proved warranted the next day, when in the library, Sam introduced him to a man named Brett Stone, the very Vale noble who apparently fancied himself a scholar of Targaryen lore. Stone greeted Jon with a curt bow, eyeing him with a curious tilt of the head. "So you're the one they say is Ned Stark's bastard," Stone remarked, folding his arms. "We share the same vow now, so I suppose we're brothers. Forgive me for being forward, but I've always had an interest in Targaryen history. My mother used to read me stories of the Dance of Dragons. You ever hear such tales growing up? Being raised by a Stark?" Jon tensed at once, feigning casual disinterest. "I know the usual stories," he replied. "Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight, King Aegon the Conqueror, and so on. My father never spoke much of them." Stone nodded, but his gaze flickered over Jon's face, as if searching for hidden meaning. "I see. You have the look of a Stark. That's true enough." Sam cleared his throat. "We were just going through some historical records," he said, trying to lighten the mood. "We found an old account of the doom of Valyria. Fascinating, isn't it?" Stone's eyes glimmered. "Quite. The Targaryens escaped the doom by the grace of prophecy, if you believe the stories. Daenerys the Dreamer foresaw the destruction, and so House Targaryen relocated to Dragonstone. If not for that, they would have perished with the rest." He gave a small smile. "One could say the Targaryens were chosen by fate, if you believe in such things." Jon forced a polite nod, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Every word about Targaryens set his nerves alight. He flicked a glance at Sam, who looked equally uneasy. "Fate can be cruel," Jon said, tucking his hands behind his back. "Look at how many Targaryens have fallen since Aegon's conquest. Their line is all but gone now." Stone's gaze narrowed. "Is it?" he said quietly, almost conspiratorially. "There are rumors, whispers that Daenerys Targaryen lives with 3 dragons across the sea. And some even say another Targaryen might live, hidden in the 7 kingdoms. Or perhaps across the narrow sea. Who can say? Westeros is rife with secrets." Jon felt a knot form in his stomach, but he maintained a calm facade. "People will say anything in times of war," he replied. "Truth can be harder to come by." "Indeed," Stone said, smiling thinly. He turned to Sam. "I'd love to learn more about what the library here contains on Targaryen lineage, if you'd help me find some references. Perhaps genealogies, marriage records, that sort of thing." Sam's eyes darted nervously to Jon, then back to Stone. "Oh yes, there's a fair selection in the genealogical archives, though some are incomplete. I could show you if you like." He glanced at Jon, who gave the slightest nod. They were only old books, after all. Hiding them would only arouse suspicion. Together, the 3 of them headed deeper into the library, torches illuminating shelves of dusty tomes. The smell of old parchment and leather bindings filled the air, a comfort to Sam but a source of tension for Jon. Stone walked slowly, running his fingers along the spines of various volumes, muttering the occasional question about Targaryen history. Jon mostly stayed silent, resisting the urge to flee. At length, Stone paused at a thick tome bound in faded red leather. "Here, this might be interesting," he said, pulling it free. The front bore a sigil of the 3-headed dragon. "It's an old record of Targaryen marriages, dating back to Aegon I. Might it have updated entries for Prince Rhaegar?" Sam peered over Stone's shoulder. "Possibly. Rhaegar's generation would be near the back, if it's a comprehensive volume. But a lot of these records were subject to revision after Robert's rebellion. Censors, you know?" Stone nodded gravely. "A shame. History should remain impartial." He flipped through the pages with care. Jon watched out of the corner of his eye, half expecting some damning reference to appear that spelled out his own parentage. But either the record was incomplete, or the information had been carefully excised. Stone eventually snapped the book shut with a disappointed sigh. "Nothing about a secret marriage or an unknown child," he remarked. "A pity." Jon's heart skipped a beat, but he forced a neutral expression. "Well, if it was secret, it wouldn't be recorded," he said with a shrug. Stone studied him for a moment, then grinned. "True enough," he conceded. "Perhaps it's all nonsense. Still, It's interesting to think that the Targaryen line might not be as extinguished as the crown would have us believe. Interesting, yes, Jon murmured. But talk like that can earn you a sharp blade in your back. Best to keep your interests academic, brother. Stone nodded slowly, apparently taking the hint. For that day, at least, the conversation ended there. Still, Jon's unease lingered. He felt as though a hawk hovered overhead, waiting for him to slip up. The realm might not suspect his identity yet, but men like Brett Stone, who delved into conspiracies and genealogies, posed a risk. If Stone pieced together any clues, or if he noticed Jon's occasional slip in reaction whenever Targaryens were mentioned, rumor might begin to spread. Mormont had urged him to remain silent, but it was becoming a daily struggle not to let his heritage slip through cracks in his carefully maintained facade. Days turned into weeks, and the flow of news from the south did not abate. The War of the Five Kings, as some were calling it, raged on with no clear victor. Jon heard rumors that Robb Stark had won several battles against the Lannisters, capturing Jaime Lannister himself, while King Joffrey still held Sansa in King's Landing. Stannis had claimed that Joffrey was not even Robert's trueborn son, that he was born of incest between Cersei and Jaime. Jon could hardly wrap his head around the labyrinth of claims, half-truths, and outright lies that coiled through the Seven Kingdoms. One night, under the flickering glow of a brazier in the common hall, Jon found PYP and Gren huddled with Sam, discussing the rumors that King Stannis had adopted some strange new religion. Their words drifted to Jon's ears, but he paid little attention until PYP quipped, "We've got half the realm claiming to be king or queen. Who knows? Maybe we've even got a Targaryen or two lurking in the shadows." Jon's heart lurched, but he kept his face impassive. Gren barked a laugh. A Targaryen hiding in the shadows? Not likely. They had silver hair, didn't they? You'd spot them a mile off. I heard Rhaegar's hair was silver gold, Sam said quietly. But Bast, he caught himself. But I suppose if a Targaryen child took after the mother's coloring, you might not know, especially if no one's looking. Jon sucked in a breath. He busied himself spooning stew into his bowl, trying to act like the conversation did not affect him. But PYP caught the flicker of tension in his eyes. "What's wrong, Jon?" he teased. "You look as if you've seen a ghost." Jon's grip on the ladle tightened. "It's nothing," he replied, mustering a wry smile. "Just a bit tired from training." PYP grinned. "Or maybe you're worried that the Targaryens come for you, like a ghost from the past." Jon rolled his eyes, forcing a chuckle he did not feel. "I'm worried about a lot of things, PYP, but a Targaryen ghost isn't one of them." Conversation moved on, but the moment hammered home just how precarious his secret was. Even an offhand jest made Jon's pulse race. Every day he balanced the desire to speak his truth and the necessity of hiding it. And every day, the realm's chaos seemed to inch closer, as if the war would eventually swallow the Night's Watch as well, vow or not. The blow came unexpectedly one crisp morning when a raven from Winterfell arrived bearing dire news. Winterfell had been taken. The castle had fallen not to the Lannisters, but to Theon Greyjoy. Jon read the short message with mounting horror. Bran and Rickon were rumored dead, though the letter was not certain. Theon, his friend from boyhood, had betrayed Robb and seized Winterfell in the name of the Iron Islands. Jon's knees nearly gave out when he saw the words. The fall of Winterfell, the possible death of his brothers. A swirl of anguish and fury surged within him. What kind of a monstrous realm was this, where childhood friends betrayed each other and children were put to the sword? The next hours were a blur. Jon's anger raged so fiercely that he nearly forsook his vows on the spot, grabbing his sword and preparing to ride south to exact vengeance. Ghost sensed his turmoil, pacing in agitation around him. But Sam found Jon and threw his arms around him in a desperate embrace, pleading with him not to do anything rash. "You can't leave," Sam whispered, tears in his eyes. "It would be desertion, Jon. They'd hunt you down. And it might be for nothing if the rumors aren't true, if Bran and Rickon are still alive. Think of what your father, what Ned, would want." Those words snapped something in Jon. Ned Stark, who had lied about Jon's parentage, had still been the man who raised Jon with honor and love. Jon believed Ned would not want him to throw away his life in a blind rush for vengeance, especially if it meant ignoring the threat at the wall. Jon collapsed to his knees, fists trembling, tears stinging his eyes. The sense of powerlessness was overwhelming. He had all this potential as a Targaryen heir, as a warrior, yet he could do nothing to save Winterfell or his brothers. He thought of revealing his lineage then, to rally support, to appeal to the realm's sense of justice. But no, the realm had no sense left, and the Night's Watch was neutral, or so it claimed. He told the Lord Commander of his anguish, though he left out the Targaryen aspect. Mormont already knew that, and it changed nothing. Mormont simply gave him a sober look. "My sympathies, lad," he said gruffly. "Truly, but we have our war and we need every man. Winterfell's loss is a tragedy, but the Watch cannot ride to the rescue. Our duty is here." Jon returned to his bunk, feeling as if he were entombed in the black cloak he wore. That night, he tossed restlessly, haunted by nightmares of burning castles and dead direwolves. Morning found him hollow-eyed but resolved. He could not leave. He would keep to his vow, but he would never forget who he was, both a Stark by upbringing and, as he believed, a Targaryen by blood. Someday, the realm would have to answer for the wrongs inflicted on his family, but that day was not now. In the midst of this turmoil, the Lord Commander announced an expedition beyond the wall. Wildlings were gathering in numbers unseen in living memory, and there were reports of whites and White Walkers. Jon was chosen to accompany Mormont as his steward, along with a group of seasoned rangers including Qhorin Halfhand. The goal was to investigate rumors, gather intelligence, and reaffirm the Night's Watch's presence in the far north. Jon saw this as both a reprieve and a challenge. It would take him away from the daily tension of Castle Black, where rumors of Targaryens and treacherous new recruits threatened his secret. But it also carried the risk of venturing into truly deadly territory. The morning they set out, Jon donned his black leathers and fur cloak, hooking Longclaw at his hip. Ghost trotted beside him. Sam stood at the gate to see them off, wringing his hands. "Be careful, Jon," he said, tears shining in his eyes. "Remember what you told me. If anything happens, you said." He choked up, and Jon clasped his arm reassuringly. "I'll remember, Sam," Jon said softly, grateful beyond words for his friend's loyalty. "Take care of yourself, and watch out for that Vale man, Stone. He's too curious." Sam nodded vigorously. "I will." Lord Commander Mormont led the column through the gates, and Jon spurred his horse forward with the rest. The wall loomed behind them, a vast presence of ice, and he wondered if he would ever see it again. As they journeyed into the haunted forest, the trees closed in around them, and the wind carried sounds that made even seasoned rangers glance over their shoulders. Jon tried to focus on the mission, on spotting tracks and forging a path north, but his mind wandered to what might happen if they truly encountered the White Walkers, if the realm was forced to reckon with an ancient enemy. Could that be the moment for him to reveal himself, to unite men under a single banner against the true threat? But as the days passed, the hush of the forest yielded no easy answers. They discovered empty wildling villages, cold camps, and unsettling signs of dead creatures that did not look like normal scavenger kills. The men grew restless. Lord Commander Mormont pressed them on, determined to find the truth of the wildling threat and possibly Mance Raider's main host. Eventually, they reached Craster's Keep, that foul compound run by the unsavory Craster. The man's hospitality was grudging, laced with resentment. Even so, Mormont insisted they accept his meager offer of shelter. Jon, for his part, found it difficult to hide his disgust at Craster's ways, the presence of his daughter wives, and the creeping sense of something unnatural in the man's dealings with the others. Still, they stayed the night, gleaning some sparse information about the wildlings gathering at an ancient stronghold called the Fist of the First Men. Craster spoke of Mance Raider leading thousands. He refused to elaborate on anything else, claiming ignorance or disinterest in the undead. But Jon saw something dark flit across Craster's eyes whenever the others were mentioned. They pressed on, forging deeper into the cold wilderness. The journey tested the endurance of every man. Even seasoned rangers found the cold biting at their bones, and supplies ran thinner with each passing day. Ghost was invaluable, sometimes scouting ahead and returning to Jon with subtle whines of caution. Often the nights were eerie. Strange hoots and howls echoed in the distance, and men would cling tighter to their cloaks, remembering the horror stories told at Castle Black. Through it all, Jon tried to keep his mind on the here and now, but the question of his heritage gnawed at him. If the others attacked, if he died here in the haunted forest, would his secret die with him? Would the truth of Rhaegar and Lyanna be lost forever? At last, they came upon the Fist of the First Men, a ring-shaped outcrop of rock and earth that overlooked a wide swath of forest. Mormont declared it a defensible position, and so they made camp, lighting fires and posting sentries. Days stretched on, with no sign of Mance Rayder's main host. The tension was palpable. Men began to speak in hushed voices of the White Walkers again, recalling an ill-fated expedition years past that had lost many men to supernatural forces. Jon could feel the atmosphere thickening, as if reality itself were bracing for a collision with something unearthly. One night, huddled near a fire, Jon was joined by Qhorin Halfhand, a legend among rangers for his exploits and cunning. The man was tall, with a calm presence that seemed forged by countless brushes with death. He studied Jon for a moment, the flicker of the flames dancing in his one good eye. "You're Ned Stark's son, they say," Qhorin said quietly. "You've got skill, that much is plain." Jon stiffened, aware that no matter how far he went, he could not escape the question of his paternity. But Qhorin's tone was not accusatory. There was a certain curiosity in it. Jon forced himself to speak. "I learned to fight at Winterfell," he said. "My father insisted on it." Qhorin nodded, staring into the flames. "Ned Stark was an honorable man. I fought with him during Robert's rebellion. Saw Prince Rhaegar once, at a distance, on the Trident." He glanced at Jon again, as if searching for a reaction. "Didn't get close, but I remember the silver of his hair, the rubies on his breastplate. He seemed more a creature of song than a man of blood and steel, but blood he did shed. War is war, and many died." Jon tried to keep his face neutral, but hearing mention of Rhaegar made his pulse throb. "That's what I've heard," he said quietly. Qhorin sighed. "Aye, we're leave scars that don't fade. The realm bleeds still all these years later. Sometimes I wonder if the others are drawn to that blood." He paused, then turned fully to Jon. "You've got the look of a Stark, but sometimes I see something else in your eyes, boy, if you'll pardon me saying." Jon's heart hammered. I don't know what you mean," he deflected. Qhorin shrugged, that calm gaze unwavering. "Maybe it's just the will of the old gods, or maybe it's something else. Doesn't matter much. We all wear black here, lad. Best remember that. The identity we had before doesn't matter so much now." He offered Jon a tight, understanding nod, then strode away into the darkness. Jon stared after him, chest tight. Did Qhorin suspect the truth, or was he just remarking on the intangible differences that came from living with a secret burden? In any case, it renewed Jon's resolve to be cautious. He was not as invisible as he liked to believe. The Watch was full of keen-eyed veterans who missed little. Fate, however, cares little for caution when it moves in the darkness beyond men's comprehension. One night, the others did come, silent as death, gliding through the shadows of the forest. A sentry's cry rang out, cut short by a blood-curdling shriek. Men roused themselves from tents, groping for weapons. Jon emerged into the chaos, longclaw in hand, Ghost snarling at his side. Pale shapes flickered at the edge of the firelight. Dead men, reanimated by some foul magic, rushed the camp. The night erupted in screams and the clang of steel. Jon found himself side by side with Qhorin Halfhand, hacking at a wight whose rotting flesh refused to fall unless struck by fire or dragonglass. Lord Commander Mormont roared commands, urging men to stand firm. At the far edge of the ring, a figure with eyes like blue stars flickered in and out of view, orchestrating the assault. An other, a White Walker. Jon's blood ran cold at the sight of it. The battle was frantic, savage, and terrifying. More than one black brother fell, dragged down by a tide of dead hands. The snow was churned red with fresh blood. Yet even in the panic, Jon felt something stir within him, a primal defiance that burned hotter than the cold around him. He slashed at the whites with all his might, forging a path toward the White Walker. Qhorin yelled after him, cautioning him not to go alone, but Jon pressed forward, Ghost snarling at his heels. He remembered the legends that said Valyrian steel could harm the others. Longclaw was Valyrian steel. Perhaps he had a chance. The White Walker turned, its inhuman gaze locking onto Jon, a thin smile of cruel amusement crossing its icy visage. It moved faster than any man, parrying Jon's strike with a spear of crackling ice. Sparks flew where Valyrian steel met unnatural frost. Jon's arms shook under the impact. A swirl of panic threatened to consume him. He was fighting an ancient evil, one that had ravaged the living in ages past. He sidestepped a thrust, swinging Longclaw in a desperate arc. The blade connected, slicing through the White Walker's pale armor. A shriek of unholy rage rent the air. A moment later, the creature shattered into shards of ice, its body dispersing like a brittle statue struck by a hammer. In that instant, the nearby whites seemed to falter. Some collapsed, as if robbed of the malevolent force that animated them. Others continued to lurch forward, but the tide was turning. The Black Brothers rallied, pushing back the remaining undead. Flames danced as torches were thrust at the whites. Piece by piece, the assault broke. Men panted, half-mad with fear, as the last of the undead sank into motionless ruin. When dawn finally broke, the fist of the first men was littered with corpses, both the living and the dead. The survivors staggered among the carnage, tending to the wounded and piling the whites for burning. Lord Commander Mormont was grim but resolute. He spoke quietly to Qhorin, who nodded. Then Mormont approached Jon, eyes burning with intensity. "You slew a White Walker," he said, his voice laced with wonder. "You, a fresh recruit with a Valyrian steel sword. That's a deed for the ages." Jon swallowed, feeling numb. "It was luck, Lord Commander. Nothing more." "Luck or fate," Mormont said, resting a hand on Jon's shoulder. "Either way, you saved many lives this night. The Watch will remember." Around them, the men eyed Jon with something akin to awe. He had destroyed another in single combat, something out of legend. Whispers circled. If that was possible, perhaps the others were not invincible. A slender hope in a dark time. But as night receded, a new fear crept into Jon's soul. If men discovered that he was not only the slayer of a White Walker but also a Targaryen by birth, how might they react? Would they hail him as a hero, or would they brand him a threat to the realm, a monster to be destroyed? The path he walked felt narrower than ever, with the stakes higher than his own life. He clenched his fist around Longclaw's hilt, recalling the moment of impact, the way the White Walker had shattered as if it were made of brittle glass. He thought of the swirling rumors about Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons across the sea. Fire and ice, dragons and the others, his own blood and the vow he had taken. In the aftermath of the battle, the Lord Commander convened a council of surviving officers. They decided to retreat south of the wall, bearing word of the others' resurgence to rally more men to the cause. A sense of urgency permeated every order. The Night's Watch had confirmed the worst of the old stories. The White Walkers were real, and they were on the move. They needed reinforcements, supplies, alliances, anything to survive the coming storm. Jon's heart ached at the realization that, even if the realm was too busy with its petty war of kings, the Night's Watch had to try. Perhaps that was his destiny as well, to fight this war in the shadows, beyond the petty claims of crowns and thrones. He had always wanted to be a ranger, to protect the realm from the threats beyond the wall. And if the realm discovered he was a Targaryen, would that help or hinder the fight against the others? He still did not know. The retreat was grueling. The wounded had to be carried, supplies ran short, and the constant threat of more attacks weighed on everyone's minds. Yet Ghost guided Jon, and Jon lent his strength to those who struggled. His body ached, and his spirit was weary, but a strange conviction burned in his chest. This was a war that transcended the petty squabbles of kings. This was life against death, fire against ice. And in that crucible, Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, or whoever he truly was, would be forged anew. By the time they reached the wall again, battered and exhausted, the men were greeted with a mixture of relief and dread by those who had remained. The tale of their harrowing encounter spread quickly, and Jon found himself the reluctant focus of admiration from his brothers in black, who were eager for any sign that the others could be fought. Sam busied himself with caring for the wounded, but he found Jon one night, pressing a bowl of stew into his hands. "They're saying you killed an other," Sam said, eyes shimmering with a mixture of fear and pride. "Is it true?" Jon stared into the stew, remembering the sound the creature made as it shattered. "It's true," he said quietly. "It wasn't easy. I was certain I was going to die. But Longclaw, it's Valyrian steel. The White Walker's spear shattered when it struck, and I landed a lucky blow." Sam exhaled softly. "Amazing," he whispered. "That must mean the others can be killed. That gives us hope." He paused, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "Do you think the blood of the dragon helped somehow?" Jon stiffened. "I don't know. I had the sword, which was forged in Valyria. Maybe that matters. But I'm still just a man, Sam. I'm not some mythical hero or a dragon in human form. Let's not start that kind of rumor." Sam nodded quickly, understanding Jon's caution. "Of course. I just thought there might be something more. Maybe," Jon allowed, "or maybe not. Either way, we need dragonglass, Valyrian steel, whatever weapons can harm them. We need men. We need the entire realm to know the truth about what we face." Sam nodded. "But will they listen? War is still raging. The Lannisters, the Starks, the Tyrells, the Greyjoys. Everyone is fighting for a crown." His eyes flickered to Jon. "If only we had a king who understood the real threat." Jon heard the unspoken implication. If only we had a Targaryen. He stared at his friend, and for a moment, he felt the faintest flicker of possibility. If he revealed himself, if he declared that the Targaryen line lived and had arisen to defend Westeros in its darkest hour, would men unite behind him? Or would it cause them to splinter further, seeing him as another pretender? He had no illusions about the cunning ruthlessness of lords and kings. Their politics were a viper's nest. Still, the White Walkers would not wait. Winter was closing its icy fist around the realm. "Not yet," Jon said softly. "Lord Commander Mormont advises caution, and I can't say he's wrong. The realm is in no state to accept a new king without bloodshed. If that bloodshed distracts us from the others, we're all doomed." Sam lowered his head, though a flicker of hope remained in his gaze. "I understand. But if it comes to it, you'd make a good king, Jon." Jon's chest tightened. King. The word was an uncomfortable mantle, one he had never sought. Yet in his mind, he glimpsed the visions he had sometimes conjured as a child. A noble father returning from war, a mother he had never met but dreamed of. It was a fantasy. Reality was so much harsher. He forced a small smile. "I'm just a brother of the Night's Watch, Sam. Nothing more." Sam nodded, though he seemed unconvinced. Then he told Jon to eat his stew before it went cold and slipped away to attend to the next wounded man. In the days that followed, the Night's Watch scrambled to send ravens to every corner of the Seven Kingdoms, warning of the others' return. Most were skeptical, many did not respond, and those who did offered nothing substantial. The war ground on. The Lord Commander planned another expedition, or so it was rumored, an even larger one if they could muster the men, to find Mance Rayder's host and learn more of the White Walkers' movements. Meanwhile, Castle Black prepared for winter, storing what supplies they could, training recruits, and praying that some alliance or victory might come from the south. And Jon kept his silence. Each night, he lay awake, haunted by nightmares of the day Ned Stark had parted from him to ride south to King's Landing, by the memory of the White Walker's icy gaze, and by a vision of a dragon egg pulsing with fire in the darkness. He was the embodiment of two great houses, the product of love and rebellion. He was a black brother with a vow to forsake all claim to crowns or children. He was a potential king if only he chose to announce it. Snow fell in thick, silent drifts around the wall, burying footprints and erasing the day's labor. The swirling flakes turned everything monochrome, a world of white and black. It reminded Jon that, in the end, perhaps choices were simpler than they seemed. Fight for life or succumb to the creeping doom. Whether wearing the crown of a king or the cloak of a brother, the fight was the same. The realm needed men of courage, men who would stand against the storm. Jon vowed that he would be such a man, no matter what name he bore. Yet as he lingered near the ramparts one evening, gazing at the twilight sky, he sensed that a day would come when he could hide no longer. The secret of his birth would not remain buried forever. The truth was a dragon, stirring in the ashes, waiting to hatch. And when it did, Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, would be at the heart of a tempest that might either save the realm or destroy it entirely. For now, he could only wait, watch, and prepare for the war that loomed on all horizons. The living against the dead, the old world against the new. In his heart, he felt the distant roar of dragons, the cold cry of dire wolves, and knew that, someday, he would have to answer with a roar of his own. In the days that followed their return from the Fist of the First Men, life at Castle Black existed in a strange limbo between triumph and terror. They had survived an onslaught of whites and a White Walker, validating rumors older than living memory. Jon Snow had even slain one of the others with Valyrian steel. That impossible deed lit a spark of hope among his brothers. Yet it was tempered by the knowledge of how many good men had fallen on the ice that night. The dead who had come back could come again, and in greater numbers. Lord Commander Mormont pressed for swift measures, sending out more ravens to every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. But the only response they ever seemed to receive was silence or disbelief. That silence weighed on every black brother like a funeral shroud. Castle Black itself, though large, felt claustrophobic. Tension gnawed at the men. Fear of another attack made them jumpy at every shifting shadow, every gust of wind that rattled the old ramparts. The officers enforced strict discipline. Ser Alliser Thorne led renewed drills each dawn, pushing recruits and rangers alike to the brink of collapse. Donal Noy hammered out more arrowheads, punishing the anvil long into the night. PYP, Gren, and the others tried to keep spirits high with jokes and gossip, but every man's laughter carried an edge of desperation. The wind in the courtyard whistled like a dirge through the dark hours, and more than once, men woke with nightmares of pale hands clawing at their throats. Amid this charged atmosphere, Jon Snow's reputation grew. He did nothing to encourage it. In fact, he tried his utmost to deflect attention, determined not to let the story of his duel with the White Walker overshadow the mission itself. Yet stories had a life of their own, and men found inspiration in the knowledge that the others could bleed, if one called that crystalline ichor in their veins blood. Whispers circulated that Jon might be destined for greatness, that perhaps the old gods favored him, or that he was touched by some spirit of winter. Jon chafed at such rumors, uneasy in every sense. His real secret, that he carried Targaryen blood, felt heavier than ever. If the men were this eager to elevate him simply because he had struck down one of the others, how would they react if they discovered his lineage? Would they see him as a savior, or would they recoil at the name Targaryen, remembering Mad King Aerys' cruelties? Samwell Tarly stood by Jon's side through it all, worried eyes following his friend's every step. Jon continued to confide in him when he could, though he shared few specifics about what he planned. In truth, Jon's plans were uncertain. He had listened to the Lord Commander's counsel. Reveal nothing, remain loyal to the Watch. Yet every fresh horror from beyond the wall and every piece of dire news from the south threatened to unravel that fragile secrecy. Even Master Aemon, when Jon found time to visit the old man in his tower, seemed to sense a building crisis. Though aged and nearly blind, Aemon retained a shrewdness that cut through any feigned ignorance. He pressed Jon with gentle questions about duty, about identity, about sacrifice. Jon wondered if, once upon a time, Aemon Targaryen had felt a similar pressure to renounce or claim a birthright. Winter's hand closed tighter around the land. Even the autumn days felt bleak and cold, with only the occasional respite of watery sunlight. The ravens brought tidings of continued war in the south. Robb Stark was winning battles against the Lannisters, but fresh enemies gathered against him. Stannis Baratheon had declared himself the rightful king, citing Joffrey's illegitimacy, and Renly Baratheon had risen with the support of the Reach, until Renly, too, was slain under mysterious circumstances. The small folk were scattered, confused, and frightened by talk of kings on all sides. None of that, however, helped the Night's Watch. Their pleas for men and supplies fell on deaf ears. Every lord was busy defending his own piece of land or pressing his own claim. The great war that truly mattered, the war between the living and the dead, seemed a distant, half-believed myth to those who had never stood on the ice and watched their fallen comrades rise. Faced with the realm's apathy, Lord Commander Mormont resolved on a new course. He would send a strong party, far larger than the first, beyond the wall to find Mance raiders' gathering of wildlings and uncover any sign of the others' movement. Perhaps capturing a white or presenting undeniable proof could rally the great houses. But men were needed, strong backs and sharp minds. He planned to muster them at Eastwatch by the sea and then strike north. The 100-foot wall of ice at Castle Black was not the only passage. The Watch had forts and hidden ranger paths dotted along the miles of the wall's length. Jon learned that he was to accompany the expedition again. The news made his stomach roil. Memories of the slaughter on the Fist still haunted his dreams, and he had come within a hair's breadth of dying there. But the Lord Commander believed in him. Among the Black brothers, Jon's skill with a blade and uncanny bond with Ghost had become legendary. The old bear insisted that Jon be part of whatever reconnaissance they undertook. Before they departed, a biting wind whipped off the top of the wall late one afternoon, chilling every corner of the courtyard. Jon was adjusting his saddle on a rangy black horse when Mormont beckoned him over. The Lord Commander stood near the stables, chatting with Qhorin Halfhand and a few senior rangers. The Halfhand's presence set Jon's nerves on edge. The man had an air of quiet intensity that commanded respect wherever he went. As Jon approached, Mormont fixed him with a level stare. "We ride for Eastwatch at first light. I want you close by my side during this journey, Jon. You'll serve as my steward again, and you'll have your ears open. The men look up to you. Some might come to you with confessions or concerns. If they do, I want to know." Jon gave a brisk nod. "I understand, Lord Commander." Mormont's gaze flicked to Qhorin, who watched silently. "Word from Craster's Keep suggests the wildlings are on the move. Mance Raider rallies them by the thousands. We can't be sure if he intends to cross the wall at Eastwatch, Castle Black, or the Shadow Tower. All we know is that he's determined to flee the others by leading his people south. If we can't stop them or parley with them, the realm will face a new invasion it can ill afford." Jon understood the gravity. "Then let's hope we find a way." Qhorin Halfhand reached out and clasped Jon's forearm. "We all hope for that. Keep your wits about you. Beyond the wall is a harsh land, but your dire wolf and your sword might tip the balance in our favor. Remember what we're truly fighting." Jon's mouth felt dry. "The dead," he said quietly, "and those who command them." "I," Qhorin replied, "never forget." They departed the next morning, a column of near 100 Black brothers led by the Lord Commander. The air was crisp, and a fresh layer of snow blanketed the courtyard as they filed out. Sam waved anxiously, though he was not selected for this expedition. The old bear wanted Sam to continue his work at the wall, preserving what knowledge they had in the library and helping with communication. Jon felt a pang of guilt and relief. He was glad Sam would remain out of immediate danger, yet he missed his friend's comforting presence. The journey to Eastwatch took them along the base of the wall, where the ice reared overhead in a sheer, glistening cliff of pale blue-white. At times, the wind caught swirling motes of snow, sending them dancing over the top of the wall in ghostly veils. The Black brothers kept a wary formation, crossbows and swords at the ready. Now and again they heard distant howls. Ghost padded silently at Jon's side, sniffing the air. The dire wolf was ever alert, his hackles rising at scents that were invisible to human senses. Eastwatch by the Sea was a stark fortress on the coast, where the salty tang of the narrow sea clashed with the endless chill of the north. Buildings of timber and stone huddled inside a protective wall, and a small port jutted into the water, where a few weather-beaten ships bobbed at anchor. Whitecaps hammered against the shore. The watchmen there greeted Mormont's force with relief and wariness. They, too, had heard stories from the returning survivors of the Fist. The sight of so many black brothers, many still bearing scars and haunted gazes, confirmed that the rumors were no mere campfire tales. They stayed 3 days at Eastwatch, gathering provisions and receiving a handful of reinforcements from the men stationed there. Jon felt uneasy every hour, anticipating some fresh disaster. He spent the nights restless, thinking about how close they were to the sea, to Dragonstone on the horizon, a Targaryen seat of old. It was said that the Targaryens had left Valyria to settle on Dragonstone before the Doom, and from that stronghold, they had launched their conquest of Westeros. Jon mused that if he were to reveal himself, might he sail to Dragonstone and stake his claim? The notion felt surreal. His oath forbade such an action, and the realm's war overshadowed any peaceful transition of power. Still, his mind drifted to the possibility that Daenerys Targaryen might yet live across the waves, forging her own path. If 2 Targaryens emerged, who would Westeros follow? Such thoughts receded when the day came to depart. They boarded a small flotilla of rickety ships, one of them ironically named the Ice's Grin, and headed north up the coast, hugging the shoreline. It was a calculated risk. Traveling by land would have taken longer, and Mormont did not wish to lose precious time. On the ships, they huddled together below deck, staving off seasickness and the cold wind that seemed to penetrate every plank. The spray of the ocean stung their faces each time they ventured above deck. Jon found Ghost pacing restlessly in the ship's hold, unaccustomed to the rocking. The direwolf whined and pressed against Jon's legs whenever the waves grew too rough. Eventually, they found a place to land, a thin beach flanked by snow-laden cliffs. The Black brothers disembarked with relief, though the biting wind on land was hardly an improvement. Once again, they formed up and began the slow march inland, into territory rarely traversed by men of the Watch. They followed the path of an old river that had frozen in many places, forging north toward rumored wildling encampments. Scouts went ahead. Qhorin Halfhand led a small cadre, while the rest traveled at a steady pace behind. The days grew short, and the nights seemed endless. They set up fortified camps wherever they could find natural defenses, rocky outcrops, dense stands of pines, or winding ravines. On the 7th day of their march, Qhorin returned with urgent news. A sizable band of wildlings had been spotted near the Milkwater, apparently patrolling the area. Jon's heart quickened at the possibility of capturing one for interrogation. The Lord Commander ordered a night approach. Under a sky streaked with faint auroras, a portion of the Watch crept up on the wildling camp. Jon was with Qhorin in the vanguard. Ghost moved ahead, silent as snowfall. They saw tents made of hides and fur, ringed by sharpened stakes. A handful of wildlings huddled around fires. Jon felt a pang of uncertainty. These were free folk, not monsters. They fled the others just as the Watch struggled to fight them. But Mormont's orders were clear. They needed information. If the wildlings resisted, steel would be drawn. They struck swiftly, surprising the watchmen at the perimeter. A brief struggle ensued. Wildlings shouted curses, brandishing spears and crude axes. The Black brothers charged in with practiced discipline, and soon enough the wildlings were subdued. Several had fallen, but Qhorin took no joy in it, ordering that the wounded be tended. A half-dozen prisoners were rounded up, including one woman with vivid red hair. She glared at Jon with furious blue eyes as he helped tie her hands, but said nothing. When the confrontation died down, the Watch discovered that the rest of the wildling band had likely scattered into the surrounding hills, leaving only the handful who had chosen to fight. With the prisoners secured, Mormont convened a hurried interrogation in the midst of the ruined camp. Night pressed in on them, and the cold seemed to creep into every gap in armor and cloth. The Lord Commander questioned the wildlings about Mance Raider's location, about how many were gathering and whether they had seen evidence of the others. Most only spat at him or refused to speak. The red-haired woman, however, surprised them by answering in a voice laced with contempt but also a certain fierce pride. She identified herself as Ygritte. She did not reveal Mance Raider's exact plans, but she scoffed at the notion that the free folk were the realm's greatest threat. "You kneelers are blind," she snarled. "The real danger's out there with eyes of blue fire. You'd rather fight us than join together against what's coming." Mormont's face was grim. "We've tried to warn our lords. They do not listen." She let out a derisive laugh. "Maybe you need a new lord, then." For a heartbeat, Jon felt a tremor run through him. He could almost sense the unspoken question. Did the Night's Watch need a king? And if so, would it be the one standing among them, disguised in black? He glanced away, uneasy, and Ygritte's eyes flickered over him with an unreadable expression. Though they gleaned few concrete details, they surmised that Mance's host was massive, far larger than the Watch had previously believed. Thousands of wildlings had banded together, men, women, children, intent on fleeing south no matter the cost. Mormont faced a grim decision: fight and risk being overwhelmed, or attempt some sort of treaty that might be beyond the Watch's power to grant. They could not speak for the lords of the south, nor promise safe passage. He ultimately decided to keep a few prisoners for further questioning and release the others who had surrendered on the condition they deliver a warning to Mance Raider. "Cross the wall in peace if you can, but do not expect the Night's Watch to stand aside." They broke camp at dawn, leading the captives in their train. Among them, Ygritte remained defiant, her bound hands chafed raw by rope. Qhorin Halfhand suggested Jon look after her. "She seems to have taken notice of you," Qhorin said quietly, eyeing Jon with a hint of amusement. "Perhaps you can learn more." Jon felt a surge of discomfort, but he nodded. Over the next few days, whenever they stopped to rest or make camp, he would bring Ygritte water or offer bits of dried meat. She rarely refused, but her conversation was barbed. He discovered that she was no meek captive. She teased him about being a crow, a kneeler's whelp, a lad who knew nothing of true freedom. Yet behind her jests lay a sharpened edge of truth. The free folk might not follow the same laws and customs, but they did not kneel to kings. Jon, however, carried the burden of being the realm's rightful heir, a form of kneeling all its own, to destiny or to duty. Sometimes he wanted to shout at her that he was no mere kneeler, that his blood was that of a dragon and a wolf, but he kept silent. The vow was all that held him in place. Still, he found himself drawn to Ygritte's fierce spirit, her passion. She spoke often of the wind on the heights of the Frostfangs, of the taste of fresh-caught rabbit roasted over a fire, of a freedom that few south of the wall truly understood. In return, Jon found himself revealing small pieces of his life, growing up in Winterfell, not quite a Stark but raised alongside them. He never breathed a word about Rhaegar Targaryen or the secret that haunted him. Even so, sometimes he felt as though she peered right through him, glimpsing shadows of truths he could not speak. The Lord Commander led them deeper into the wilderness, following rumors of a large wildling outpost near a series of frozen lakes. They had to circumvent treacherous terrain, cross precarious ice bridges, and endure howling winds that carried the sting of frostbite. Men grew weary and sullen. Supplies dwindled. Ghost and a few hunting dogs scouted game, returning with meager hares. At night, huddled around sparse fires, the men shared nervous glances. Each day they marched, they drew closer to Mance Raider's territory, and possibly the domain of the others. On the 14th night of their trek, as the Watch set camp in a narrow valley, Jon stood guard near the prisoners. Snow drifted down from a slate-gray sky, muffling the world in silence. Ygritte crouched near a small fire, her flame-hued hair stark against the white landscape. She caught Jon's eye, cocking her head in a silent summons. Jon hesitated. He was meant to guard her, not converse like a friend. Yet something compelled him to step closer. She stared at the flames. "They say a storm's coming," she murmured. "But it's not just wind and snow. You feel it, don't you?" Jon swallowed. "Aye, The others. She nodded. The others. The cold. The end of the world, maybe. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I've heard the crows talk about you, Jon Snow. You killed one of those walkers made of ice. They say your sword is magic-s. Jon's cheeks warmed, though the night air was freezing. I'm no hero. I did what I had to do, and it wouldn't have mattered if I hadn't had Valyrian steel. She studied him with that incisive gaze. Still, you did it. That's more than most men can say. Her tone softened ever so slightly. Why serve these kneelers? You seem different. You speak like them. But you've a sadness in your eyes, as though you carry something heavy. Jon felt his heart twist. If she only knew how heavy. I have my duty, he said, struggling to keep his voice even. Your precious duty, she said bitterly. Lords and their laws, crows and their vows. They'd see you freeze to death out here, all for the sake of a wall. Jon flinched. In truth, sometimes he wondered the same thing. Would the Night's Watch demand everything from him, even if it led to his death? But another part of him remembered that the threat beyond the wall was no mere trifling matter. If the Night's Watch failed, the Seven Kingdoms would pay a terrible price. I do what I must, he replied. We all do, free folk and black brothers alike. She eyed him for a long moment, and he sensed a curious mix of pity and challenge in her expression. Then she turned away without another word, letting the flames dance on her face. The next morning, they broke camp early, forging ahead into the valley. The wind howled at their backs, as though urging them onward. Qhorin Halfhand led the scouts up a ridgeline, while the main body, including Mormont and the prisoners, picked a path through rocky passes. Jon could feel tension coiling in his belly. He glanced frequently over his shoulder, seeing only the line of black brothers trudging behind and Ghost's silent form at his side. But something felt off. Around midday, a low horn blast echoed across the frozen slopes. The watchers on a nearby peak had spotted movement. Lord Commander Mormont quickly formed ranks, ordering the men to prepare for possible combat. Bows were strung, swords drawn. Jon found himself near Qhorin, Ygritte bound at the back under guard. She stared at the horizon intently, as though she expected something momentous. A party of wildlings emerged from a bend in the valley, walking boldly in a tight formation. They carried spears, bows, and axes. At their center stood a tall man cloaked in black fur, his head adorned with a battered steel helm that did not match the rest of his attire. He halted a stone's throw from the watch, raised a hand, and bellowed in a voice that carried across the ice. I am Rattleshirt, the Lord of Bones. He lifted the bleached skull of some animal strapped to his shoulder. We come to parley in the name of Mance Rayder. Mormont stepped forward, flanked by Qhorin and 3 other rangers. Jon hovered just behind them, heart pounding. He knew of Rattleshirt by reputation. A fearsome wildling raider, famed for his brutality and strange armor made of bones. The air crackled with the potential for violence. Any misstep could lead to bloodshed. Rattleshirt eyed the Black Brothers with open scorn. Heard you crows were skulking about, capturing our people. Good men and women, forced to freeze and starve in your camps. Mance Rayder wants to know what you plan to do when 100,000 free folk march on your precious wall. Mormont's voice was like iron. We'd stop you if we can, but we know your true enemy is the same as ours, the White Walkers. We're here to learn what Mance intends. Rattleshirt let out a cackle that echoed in the frigid air. What he intends? He intends to survive, Old Crow. The dead are stirring, and you're fools if you think your ice rampart will hold them for long. Mance wants the free folk to cross south, so we might join the living rather than the dead. Let us pass, and we won't spill your blood. Fight us, and we'll climb over your corpses. Jon bristled at the threat, but Mormont kept his composure. We do not speak for the lords of the 7 kingdoms, he said, but perhaps an arrangement can be found. We ask for parley with Mance Rayder himself. Rattleshirt's lips curled. You want to walk into our camp, do you? Might be a one-way journey for you, Crow. If Mance is wise, he'll see reason, Mormont replied. We all share the same enemy now. For a moment, Rattleshirt seemed to consider. Jon caught a glimpse of movement among the wildlings behind him, some shifting uneasily, others glaring at the Black brothers with hatred. Finally, Rattleshirt gave a curt nod. "I'll take one of you to Mance. If you come under our watch as a hostage of sorts. The rest can wait here or go back behind your wall. Mance decides if you live or die." At this, Qhorin Halfhand exchanged a swift look with Mormont. It was a dangerous proposition, but perhaps the only way to avert a larger conflict. Before Mormont could speak, Qhorin volunteered. "I will go." Jon felt a rush of alarm and admiration for the ranger's courage. But Mormont hesitated. "No, Qhorin, you're too valuable as a scout. I must go." Rattleshirt let out another grating laugh. "The old bear himself. Bold. But how do we know you won't try some trick? We'll take a second crow, too. One we trust a bit less. A younger one." His eyes raked over the ranks of Black brothers until they settled on Jon. "Him. The boy with the direwolf. Mance will want to look at that one." A jolt of fear coursed through Jon. He glanced at Mormont, expecting the Lord Commander to refuse. But Mormont was silent, brow furrowed in thought. The old man knew that the wildlings were superstitious and Ghost's presence, plus Jon's rumored defeat of a White Walker, had caught their interest. Perhaps that curiosity would buy them some safety, or it might doom Jon. After a long pause, Mormont gave a terse nod. "Very well. I'll go, and Jon Snow will come with me. Qhorin, you'll remain in command of the column." That night, in a hastily erected camp beneath a towering crag, Mormont made preparations to leave. He would take only a handful of personal belongings and rely on the wildlings for safety. Jon sat by a flickering campfire, hands curled around a tin cup of hot broth. Ghost lay at his feet, tail wrapped around his body. Across the way, Qhorin approached, kneeling in the snow so his single good eye was level with Jon's face. "This is dangerous," Qhorin said quietly, voice pitched so only Jon could hear. "Mormont's trusting you to watch his back. And I trust you, too. The wildlings are cunning, especially Mance Rayder. He was once a Black brother like us. He knows how we think. Don't let him use you." Jon swallowed hard. "I won't. I'll protect the Lord Commander." Qhorin nodded, satisfied. Then he laid a gloved hand on Jon's shoulder. "And watch yourself. If Mance or his lieutenants learn something you don't want known, they'll exploit it. Guard your secrets closely." Those words rang with deeper significance, and Jon felt a pang of worry. If Mance or the wildlings discovered that Jon was a Targaryen, he had no idea how they might respond. To the free folk, kneelers were kneelers, but there might be some who remembered the old days of Targaryen kings. Or perhaps they would see it as an opportunity to sow chaos among the crows. He could only imagine how Rattleshirt would crow about capturing a hidden Targaryen. Before dawn, Jon, Mormont, and Ghost rode out under the watchful eyes of Rattleshirt and his band. The rest of the Night's Watch column remained behind, uncertain and anxious. Qhorin offered them a final salute as they disappeared into the swirling snow. Ygritte was taken along as well, though she remained bound at the wrists. Rattleshirt insisted on it, sneering that she was tainted by the crows after her capture. Jon suspected the real reason was to keep an eye on her loyalty. He walked his horse near her, wanting to offer her some reassurance, but she refused to speak, her attention fixed on the path ahead. The wildlings forced a hard pace, weaving through narrow passes and frozen marshes with a confidence born of familiarity. They skirted sheer cliffs and crossed rickety rope bridges that swayed in the icy wind. Jon's mount struggled to keep up. Lord Commander Mormont rode with his back rigid, determined not to show weakness. Ghost loped alongside them, eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Now and then, Jon caught the direwolf's uneasy growl. He, too, sensed the tension. As hours bled into days, the small company entered territory that Jon had only seen on the old maps at Castle Black. Blank spaces labeled with ominous notes of giants and dead forests. The cold was bone deep. They encountered few living souls, only glimpses of furtive shapes in the distance that might have been wild beasts or lone hunters. Once, they passed a circle of enormous stones, half buried in the snow, with strange runes etched on their surfaces. The wildlings paid it no heed, but Jon felt a prickling on his neck, as if ancient eyes were watching. At last, they descended into a sheltered valley cradled by towering mountains, where dozens of bonfires flickered in the twilight. A sprawling encampment stretched across the valley floor, dotted with tents, lean-tos, and rough structures built from logs. Countless figures moved among the fires, their voices echoing against the rocky slopes. This was Mance Raider's camp. Jon's stomach twisted at the sheer numbers. Thousands, as the rumors claimed. Men, women, and children all trying to survive. They were not an army in the traditional sense, but desperation could forge its own kind of ferocity. Rattleshirt announced their arrival with a triumphant shout, and the wildling guards at the outskirts let them pass. Jon spotted wool-clad figures glaring at him from behind piles of supplies, children wide-eyed with curiosity and fear, older men clutching spears or axes. The presence of the Lord Commander in the midst of this camp was like a wolf stepping into a den of lions, or perhaps the other way around. At any moment it felt like violence could erupt, but they pressed on, escorted by Rattleshirt's band, until they reached a large hide pavilion lit from within by lanterns. Outside stood a tall man with long, graying hair that spilled around his shoulders. He wore simple leathers and furs, but his bearing was confident, even regal. This had to be Mance Raider. He stepped forward and greeted Mormont with a solemn nod. Jeor Mormont, the old bear himself. I never thought to see the day you'd ride willingly into our camp. Mormont dismounted stiffly. You left the watch, Raider, dishonored your vow. But if you have eyes to see, you know we face a threat greater than any border or any vow. Mance's gaze flicked to Jon. And you've brought a pup. Jon Snow, is it? I've heard tales of you. Stark's bastard who slew a White Walker. He studied Jon's face, then shifted to Ghost, who prowled at the edge of the lantern light. And a direwolf, too. An ill omen, or a sign from the old gods? Jon said nothing, forcing himself to maintain a calm mask. He still reeled at the notion that Mance had heard of him. How many spies did Mance have within the Watch's ranks? Or how many rumors traveled so quickly? Mance gestured for them to enter the pavilion. Inside, the air was somewhat warmer, thanks to braziers burning near the center. The space was furnished with a few battered chairs, a wooden table, and thick rugs on the ground. Several wildling captains or chieftains, if that was the right term, stood around the table. Jon recognized one of them as Tormund Giantsbane, a burly man with a thick red beard, who gave a hearty laugh when he saw their guests. Another was a woman with short, spiky hair and a sly grin, introduced as Val. Then there was a massive figure crouched near the corner, half hidden in the shadows. Jon caught a glimpse of enormous limbs and realized it was a giant. A real giant with a face more bestial than human. His mind reeled. The old stories were coming to life all around him. Once inside, Mance sat at the table, offered a seat to Mormont, and motioned for Jon to stand by the brazier. Forgive me if I don't let you walk freely among our camp, Mance said with a thin smile. You understand I must be cautious. We are not kneelers, but we do value our lives. Mormont's grizzled face was impassive. We are here to speak of the White Walkers. If your people cross the wall, we cannot guarantee you safe passage. But we cannot guarantee you safety beyond the wall, either. Mance nodded. Aye, we know. But we also know that death marches behind us. The last time the White Walkers came, the world nearly ended, or so the stories go. I've seen enough to believe every word. He cast a significant look at Jon. You truly killed one? Jon met his gaze, forcing confidence into his voice. Yes, Valyrian steel did the work. I had help from my brothers. A murmur passed through the wildlings. Tormund stroked his beard, his eyes dancing with curiosity. Val's expression shifted in the flickering light, as though she, too, was intrigued. Mance drummed his fingers on the table. So it's true. What I've seen with my own eyes is that steel does little to the whites. But if this Valyrian steel can slay the others themselves, perhaps we have a chance. Mormont folded his arms. A chance if we unite, if the realm below can muster the will. But your crossing in vast numbers will be seen as an invasion. The lords of the north will fight you. If the Night's Watch tries to intervene, we risk breaking our vow of neutrality. Mance's eyes glinted with a hard light. I care nothing for your vow. My people won't lie down and die so that you can keep your vows intact. We're crossing the wall, one way or another. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the brazier. Jon studied Mance's expression. He sensed the wildling was not posturing. Mance truly believed the only path to survival was south. Would the realm come to see that as well? Rattleshirt spat. We should kill them now, Mance, or keep them as hostages. They can be a bargaining chip when we break the wall. Tormund shook his head, laughing. You're too quick to draw blood, Rattleshirt. This is the old bear. Have some respect. Then he eyed Jon. And the boy here, he's got more guts than you, I'd wager. The tension in the pavilion was palpable. Mance studied Mormont's face, then Jon's. Finally, he stood up, pacing a short distance across the rugs. I served in the Watch once, as you well know. I left because I grew tired of men who cared more about Iron Thrones and Lord Squabbles than the real dangers creeping in the cold. Now the days come when those dangers can no longer be ignored. He halted and turned back. This is my offer. Help me and my people cross the wall peaceably. Persuade your lords or your brothers to open the gates. In return, we will fight alongside you when the time comes, when the others pour forth. Mormont's jaw tightened. And if we refuse? Mance lifted his chin. We'll take our chances. I have a horn they call the Horn of Winter. The old tales claim it can bring the wall down. I don't know if that's true, but the threat might be enough to force the kneelers to see reason. His eyes flicked to Jon. What say you, Jon Snow? The Watchers call you a hero. Do you see the sense in this? Or are you as blind as the rest? Jon felt his pulse quicken. Mance Rayder's question cut straight to the heart of his turmoil. He could not deny that the wildlings were right. The true threat lay in the others. But to let thousands upon thousands of free folk spill over the wall without the realm's consent would surely lead to slaughter on both sides. The realm was already at war. How could they open themselves to yet another army? He spoke carefully. I know the White Walkers are real, and I know we need every living soul to stand against them. But if you cross without the Lord's consent, they'll see it as an invasion. There will be blood. Mance nodded grimly. Yes, there likely will. He looked to Mormont again. That's why I want the old bear to speak for us. But if he won't or if he can't, then we have no choice. Mormont responded with a heavy sigh. Let me return south of the wall, speak to what lords will listen. But I make no promises. Mance considered. Tormund and Val exchanged glances. Rattleshirt grunted in displeasure. Finally, Mance spoke. You can leave, Lord Commander, to carry your message, but the boy stays here as proof of our goodwill. If you come back with a better offer, we'll release him. If not, he let the words trail off. Jon's heart lurched at the idea of being left in a wildling camp. Ghost bristled as though sensing Jon's fear. Mormont instantly bristled as well. No, Jon Snow is my man. I won't leave him hostage among you. Your vow forbids you from fathering children, old bear, not from caring for your men, Mance said, a faint smirk touching his lips. Yet I ask for no man's death. I only demand surety that you won't disappear and send your black crows to murder us in our sleep. Jon spoke before Mormont could refuse again. I'll stay. Mormont glared at him. You will not. This is not your decision. Jon felt a strange calm settle over him. Lord Commander, if this is the only way to prevent bloodshed, let it be so. My life means nothing compared to the realm's survival. If my staying here can help broker peace, I'll do it. Ghost will stay with me, if that's acceptable. He forced himself to look Mance in the eye. Mance gave a slow nod. The direwolf is yours. I'll allow him, so long as he doesn't maul my people. Mormont's fists clenched, anger warring with the logic of the situation. But at last, He recognized that Mance would not yield on this point. "Very well," the old bear said, his voice rough. "Jon Snow remains here under your protection. I will return to Castle Black and speak to my officers. But let me be clear. If any harm befalls him, there will be no negotiations." Mance's gaze flicked between Mormont and Jon. "He'll be safe enough as long as you keep your word. That said, he's a crow in a nest of eagles. He'll have to watch his step." Jon nodded, trying not to dwell on the gravity of the decision. He was about to be separated from the Night's Watch, perhaps temporarily, perhaps not. He wondered if any moment in his life, aside from discovering the truth of his parentage, had ever felt so fraught with consequences. He was stepping into unknown territory, trusting the wildlings' sense of honor. And if they discovered he was a Targaryen, would that change anything at all? In the end, the arrangement was made. Mormont and Rattleshirt drafted a terse agreement that the Lord Commander would bring word to the Watch, seeking a peaceful means of allowing the free folk to cross south. Mormont would return within a fortnight with Corran and a small escort. If he did not return, or if negotiations failed, Mance would decide Jon's fate. The wildlings might try to force the crossing or employ the Horn of Winter. The Watch would respond in kind. War between them might be unavoidable. Jon and Mormont shared a final, private exchange outside the pavilion. The cold pressed against them like a tangible force. Ghost stood watch at Jon's side, ears perked. "You're braver than I gave you credit for, Snow," Mormont said, his weathered features drawn in concern. "But be careful. These people have no love for crows. If they test your loyalty, you must not let them turn you against us." Jon's throat felt tight. "I'll never betray the Watch, Lord Commander. My vow still holds." Mormont studied Jon for a long moment. Then, in a lower voice, "Remember who you are beneath that cloak. Not just the black, but your blood as well. Don't let them coerce you into revealing I." Jon gave a swift nod. "I'll be careful." The mention of his Targaryen heritage made his pulse pound. Mance Rayder, a former crow, was cunning enough to sense when something was amiss. But Jon hoped the man's attention would remain fixed on the bigger game, surviving the winter and the others, not investigating a black brother's parentage. Mormont clasped Jon's arm in a brief, paternal gesture. "The gods watch over you, boy. I will return soon." With that, the old bear swung onto his horse and rode out, Rattleshirt's escort trailing behind. The wildlings parted to let them pass, though they watched with narrowed eyes. When the last of the crows vanished from sight, the crowd in the camp seemed to close in, a ring of suspicious gazes. Jon stood alone with Ghost, feeling more isolated than he ever had in his life. Mance approached. "Welcome to the free folk, Jon Snow," he said with a wry twist of his mouth. "You'll forgive us if we don't trust you yet. But if you're honest about helping us, you'll find we can be allies." Jon swallowed hard. "I only want to see an end to the threat of the others." A woman's voice rang out. "And what if the crows betray us? Will you fight with us or against us?" It was Val, arms folded, her smile gone. Jon's stomach twisted. He could sense the suspicion radiating from many of the wildlings. They saw him as a crow, an enemy by oath. "I swore my life to the Night's Watch. I'll not lift a blade against them. But I'm here to see if we can avoid that fate." Mance and Val exchanged a look. Tormund spat into the snow and barked a laugh. "He's a straight-talking lad. I'll grant him that. Could be he'll learn there's more to life than vows and kneeling." A chorus of murmurs rose among the onlookers. Mance gestured for them to disperse, though many lingered at a distance, still curious or hostile. He led Jon to a tent pitched near the pavilion, motioning for him to enter. Inside was a simple cot of furs, a small brazier and minimal supplies. "You'll stay here," Mance said. "Not quite a prisoner's cell, but do try not to wander off. Some of my people might take offense if they catch you poking about." Jon nodded. "Fair enough." He stroked Ghost's neck, feeling the direwolf's muscles tense. "Ghost stays with me. I figured as much. Rattleshirt's men fear that beast, and that's probably for the best." Mance paused. His gaze flicked over Jon's face, as though reading the lines of tension there. Eat, rest. Tomorrow we'll talk more about what you can do for us, and what we might do for you. He left, letting the tent flap drop behind him. Jon exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Ghost paced the perimeter of the cramped space, finally settling near the cot. Jon crouched beside the direwolf, running a hand through his thick fur. "We're in it deep now, boy," Jon whispered. Ghost's red eyes flicked up at him, unblinking. "I'll need your help to keep me safe." Night fell, bringing with it the howls of wolves from the surrounding mountains. Jon barely slept, half expecting a knife in the dark from one of Mance's more militant followers. Yet no harm came. The camp was alive with subdued activity. Families tending to chores, warriors sharpening weapons, the occasional ring of laughter or children's cries. It felt surprisingly ordinary, if one ignored the looming dread that overshadowed them all. By dawn, Jon was visited by a young man named Dalbridge, who brought a wooden bowl of porridge and a few strips of dried goat meat. Dalbridge offered no conversation, merely eyed Ghost warily before leaving. Jon ate quickly, grateful for the meager meal. He had just finished when the tent flap rustled again, revealing Ygritte. She still wore the rope around her wrists, though it was looser now, and she did not seem guarded by anyone at the moment. Jon rose. "Ygritte? Why?" She cut him off with a snort. "Mance wants me to keep an eye on you, so they gave me some small freedom. Don't be thinking I'm free, mind. I'm still a prisoner of sorts. But Mance says a crow who's a hostage might trust another prisoner more than he'd trust the likes of Tormund or Rattleshirt. So here I am." She raised her bound wrists in a gesture of irony. Jon almost smiled, though the situation was far from comical. "And do you trust me, Ygritte?" She tossed her red hair, her blue eyes narrowing. "I trust you about as far as I can throw you, but you did spare my life when you first caught me. That's more than some crows would have done." Jon nodded, memories flickering back to that scuffle in the wildling camp. "So what now?" She jerked her head at the tent flap. "Now you follow me. Mance says you should see how we live, so you'll know what we're fighting for." A wry twist crossed her lips. "Might be you'll decide we're worth helping, after all." Jon and Ghost followed her outside, where the camp was stirring in earnest under the steel-gray sky. Cooking fires smoked, children scurried between tents, and grizzled warriors sorted through battered shields and spears. Jon felt many eyes on him. Some gazes were openly hostile, others merely curious. He tried to keep his posture relaxed, but inside he was coiled tight. He had never been among such a large gathering of wildlings, and the cultural gap felt like a yawning chasm. Ygritte led him along the main thoroughfare that snaked between rows of tents and lean-tos. She pointed out various clusters of people. Clans from the Frostfangs who had once sworn fealty to a chieftain named Tormund, a group of Hornfoot men from the far north, a scattering of cave-dwellers who carried strange totems. One man towered above the rest, a half-giant or so Ygritte claimed. She seemed proud, in a way, of the diversity. "We're not like you Kneelers, all bound to a single banner," she said, "but we'll unite under Mance if it means surviving the long night." Jon listened, unsettled by how normal these people seemed. They were no savage horde, at least not in the sense of being mindless. They had families, crafts, laughter, arguments. They were a people pressed to the brink by a threat that neither side had invented. He thought of the 7 kingdoms, locked in their own war over a metal chair. How would the lords and ladies react to this vast movement of desperate souls? They passed a row of cages that housed a number of large, shaggy beasts, dire wolves or perhaps normal wolves. Jon couldn't tell immediately. They also passed a corral of scrawny horses, clearly not of the best breeding, but hardy enough for the climate. At the far end of camp, Ygritte showed him a series of long, fur-draped structures that served as common halls for meals or gatherings. Outside one, Tormund Giantsbane was guffawing loudly with a smaller man who might have been his son. Tormund waved Jon over with an enthusiastic shout. Ygritte hesitated, but Jon decided to approach. Ghost padded close, hackles lifted slightly. "Ho, Crow!" Tormund bellowed. Good to see you out and about. Not pissing your britches, are you?" He slapped a meaty hand on Jon's shoulder, almost toppling him. "I was just telling my boy Toreg about how you crows make vows to never bed a woman. That true?" Jon felt his cheeks warm. "We swear off wives and children to remain loyal to the Watch. It's not exactly about never lying with a woman, but—" He trailed off, feeling a prick of embarrassment. Tormund roared with laughter. "Aye, you're a bunch of poor sods, then. A man needs a good woman in his furs on a cold night. Or a bad woman. Sometimes those are even better." He elbowed his son, who nodded in agreement. Ygritte rolled her eyes. "Shut your trap, Giantsbane. You'll scare the lad." Tormund just laughed harder. "He slew a White Walker, Ygritte. I doubt I can scare him with talk of betting." He studied Jon's face, and a glint of curiosity entered his eyes. "Still, you're young. You sure you want to go back to a life of no family, no children? Might be there's another path if you see sense and join us. We're free folk. We'd welcome a strong sword arm, especially one that can kill the others." Jon forced a polite smile, unsettled by the suggestion. "I am loyal to the Watch. I can't abandon my vows." Tormund shrugged, though he seemed slightly disappointed. "Suit yourself, Crow. We'll see how your loyalty holds up if your brothers refuse to help us." The word stung because somewhere in Jon's mind, the question lurked. What if the Watch truly refused to help these people? What if the realm demanded the wildlings be slaughtered or driven back into the arms of the others? Could Jon stand by and watch that happen? His vow bound him to protect the realm, not just from wildlings but from all threats. He thought of the truth that burned in his blood. He was a Targaryen, a name once revered or feared throughout the land. If he declared himself, would that grant him the authority to broker peace? Or would the realm simply cast him out as a pretender, inciting more chaos? They parted from Tormund, continuing through the camp. Ygritte seemed lost in her own thoughts. Jon heard her mutter under her breath about stubborn crows and bloody vows. When they reached a cluster of smaller shelters, she led him around the perimeter, showing him where the latrine pits were, where water could be collected. Finally, she stopped near a large stand of pines, motioning for Jon to walk with her beneath their boughs, away from prying ears. "Why did you really stay?" she asked, turning to face him. Snow drifted onto her flaming hair. "You've got no reason to trust us." Jon paused, exhaling a visible breath in the chill air. "Because there's a chance this can be resolved without another war. If keeping me here as a hostage makes Mance open to peace, I'll do it." She studied him, arms folded, the rope around her wrists swaying. "That's all." He hesitated. Should he tell her about the threat beyond the wall that the free folk might never have heard of? His Targaryen blood, the possibility of dragons, or the swirling prophecies that Sam had uncovered in old books? No, that was too dangerous. "That's enough," he said quietly. She narrowed her eyes. "There's something else in you, Crow. Oh wait, but I'll not pry it out of you. Not yet." She turned away as if disappointed. "Mance wants you to help him speak to your brothers when the time comes. He thinks you might be a bridge between our peoples. Prove him right, and he might consider you one of us." Jon's heart constricted. A bridge. He felt torn between two worlds in more ways than Ygritte could ever guess. "We'll see," he said. Days turned into a strange new routine. Ygritte served as Jon's begrudging guide around the camp. He helped with menial tasks, hauling firewood, clearing snowdrifts, and in return was given food and a place to sleep. Ghost never left his side, growling off any who came too close with hostile intent. Gradually, some of the wildlings grew used to the sight of the crow with a direwolf, though a deep undercurrent of distrust remained. Mance Rayder occasionally summoned Jon to the pavilion, questioning him about the Watch's strength, the layout of the forts, and any weaknesses that might be exploited. Jon tried to reveal as little as possible. Mance was sharp. He sensed half-truths, pressing for specifics. How many men guard Castle Black? How many at the Shadow Tower? Jon would evade, claiming ignorance or that the numbers fluctuated. Mance would nod thoughtfully, never quite satisfied, but never overtly accusing Jon of lying. The tension coiled with every conversation. And with every day that passed, the promised fortnight drew closer. Mormont was due to return, hopefully with news of a negotiated truce. But as the camp bustled with quiet anticipation, Jon sensed that many wildlings expected betrayal. Weapons were sharpened, storehouses reorganized, and scouts reported back from various corners of the frosty wilderness. The rumors of the Horn of Winter circulated among the free folk, whispered as a last resort. Jon tried to glean what he could about this fabled horn. Some said it was nothing but an old legend. Others claimed Mance actually possessed it. He recalled Sam once reading about a horn in the Watch's annals, something said to be able to bring down the wall. The thought filled him with dread. If it truly existed, the realm was in greater danger than it knew. At times, Ygritte's presence softened the sharp edges of Jon's isolation. Though she remained prickly and prone to barbed comments, she also showed him aspects of wildling life that he had never imagined. One day, she guided him to a remote corner of the valley where steaming vents in the earth-heated natural pools. Several free folk lounged in the waters, warming themselves, laughter echoing in the rocky enclave. The sight baffled Jon. Amid a deadly winter and the looming threat of the others, these people found a moment of respite in hot pools. Ygritte teased him for his surprise, then joked that if his vow hadn't forbidden it, she might have shown him a more intimate kind of warmth. Jon reddened fiercely, and Ygritte smirked. Despite the fleeting moments of levity, the camp bristled with anxiety. As the days stretched, word came from scouts that crows had been spotted in the distance, but they did not approach. Was it Mormont returning, or just rangers on patrol? Mance grew restless, pacing at night, conferring with Tormund and Val. Rattleshirt prowled the camp with open hostility, muttering that the crows would never keep their word. Sometimes Jon awoke in the dark, half-convinced Rattleshirt was about to slit his throat. But each time, Ghost was there, silent and watchful. At last, close to the end of the second week, the horns rang out in the valley. 2 long blasts from the sentries. The entire camp stirred. Mance emerged from his pavilion, calling for Rattleshirt to form a greeting party. Tormund and Val armed themselves. Jon hurried to the periphery, with Ghost trailing at his side, to see what was happening. His heart thudded painfully. Had Mormont come? In the distance, figures on horseback appeared, black silhouettes against the glaring snow. Closer they rode, until Jon recognized the distinctive shapes of the Night's Watch cloaks. Lord Commander Mormont led them, with Corran Halfhand at his side. A small detachment of about 10 men followed. Jon felt a surge of relief at the sight of them, though it warred with an equal measure of apprehension. The negotiations were about to begin. Would they succeed? Mance Rayder stepped forward, flanked by Tormund, Rattleshirt, and a handful of fierce-looking wildlings. Jon joined them, receiving a curt nod from Mormont as the old bear dismounted. The Lord Commander's expression was grim. Corran appeared equally grave. They did not approach with swords drawn, but they made no move to disarm either. All around them, the wildling camp looked on, thousands of eyes fixed on this moment. "You've returned, old bear," Mance said. "Have you brought an offer from your Southron lords?" Mormont's eyes flicked to Jon, then back to Mance. He drew a folded parchment from within his cloak. "I have a message from the king in the north, Robb Stark, and from certain lords of the north who stand with him. Also from a representative of King Stannis Baratheon, who claims the Iron Throne." He paused, as if every word tasted bitter. "They are willing to consider allowing the free folk to cross, but only if you pledge no harm to the north and agree to bend the knee to one of these kings. They will not permit thousands of armed wildlings to enter their territory otherwise. They demand hostages as a sign of good faith, your son or a close kin." A ripple of dismay passed through the wildlings. Bend the knee. Hostages. This was exactly what Mance had feared. Jon's heart sank. He thought of Robb Stark, once his brother in all but name, now king in the north. Would Robb truly require the free folk to bend the knee? Seemed so, if Mormont's message was accurate. And King Stannis, rumored to be a hard and unyielding man, would certainly demand fealty as well. Mance's face hardened. We do not bend the knee. That is the way of the kneelers, not ours. If your lords insist on that, they leave us no choice. Qhorin Halfhand's voice was measured. There are other terms, Mance. They offer land in the gift. The Watch's lands are largely empty. Your people could settle there, if you swear to keep the peace. Mance let out a humorless laugh. Settle under whose rule? Be taxed by lords we never chose? End up as thralls? He shook his head. No, if that's the best you have, it's not enough. Mormont's gaze flickered in frustration. Do you not see that this is unprecedented? Never before have the lords of the north even considered letting wildlings pass. And Stannis is not known for mercy. This is his brand of leniency. Mance clenched his fists. Then your kings are fools. We face extinction, yet they cling to old hatreds and demands for homage. We do not kneel, old bear. We come to survive. If your realm will not let us live, we'll have to fight to the last. And if that means we march with the horn of winter, so be it. A tense hush fell. Jon could almost feel the finality in Mance's words. This was the crux of the conflict. The free folk would not bend, and the lords of the realm would not yield. In the hush, he thought of all the prophecies, all the whispered hopes that a Targaryen might unite the realm. Did the same potential exist for uniting the free folk with the kneelers? He opened his mouth, heart pounding. Mance, Lord Commander, there might be another way. His voice trembled, but he forced himself to continue. We've all heard the rumor that Daenerys Targaryen lives across the sea with dragons, or that another Targaryen might live unknown. The Targaryens once united Westeros, from Dorne to the Wall. All eyes turned to him. Mormont's expression went ashen, clearly understanding the dangerous ground Jon was treading. Qhorin's single eye widened. Rattleshirt snorted, but Mance's gaze sharpened with immediate interest. A Targaryen? The Mad King's line was thought extinct, aside from the girl overseas. What of it, Crow? Jon exhaled, swallowing his nerves. If the lords of the realm cannot agree which king to follow, perhaps they'd follow the rightful heir if one appeared. Someone who'd see that the real threat is the others, not the free folk. Your people might not have to bend the knee if a new king recognized your freedom, so long as you recognized his. Silence. Even Ghost seemed to hold his breath. Jon felt as though the entire world balanced on a razor's edge. Mormont took a step toward him, voice tight. Jon, this is not the time. But Mance cut him off, eyes burning with intensity. You speak of a hypothetical Targaryen, Crow. Do you know of one? Jon hesitated, every instinct screaming that revealing the truth here and now would unleash storms he couldn't control. But the alternative was the ruin of everything. The free folk would not kneel to Starks or Baratheons. The realm would see them as invaders. War would flare, while the others crept ever closer. And there was a chance, however slim, that if he, Jon Snow, was recognized as a Targaryen, he might broker a compromise. All the old arguments rushed through his mind. His vow, the danger to himself, the oath that forbade him from claiming titles. And yet, had that vow not been made to protect the realm? Could this be the only way? He remembered the White Walker's cold gaze, the shift in the air when Valyrian steel struck unholy flesh. The realm needed unity or all would perish. Perhaps his vow now demanded a greater sacrifice than remaining silent. Jon lifted his chin, feeling the blood roar in his. Gasps and exclamations rippled through the assembled wildlings. Ghost let out a low, uncertain growl. Mance stared, as did Tormund, Val, and Rattleshirt. Mormont's face tightened with alarm, while Qhorin stood motionless, as though carved from stone. For a moment, the entire valley seemed to hold its breath. You, a Targaryen? Mance echoed, almost disbelieving. You're Ned Stark's bastard. Jon's voice felt oddly calm, as though he had broken through some barrier. That's the story I was told, and the one the realm believed. But my mother was Lyanna Stark, and my father was Rhaegar Targaryen. Ned Stark lied to protect me from Robert Baratheon. If I reveal my name and lineage to the realm, I might have a claim to the Iron Throne that supersedes every other pretender. But I've sworn my life to the Night's Watch, so I've kept the truth hidden. I reveal it now because we stand on the brink of annihilation." A stunned hush followed. Tormund broke it with a grunt of astonishment. Rattleshirt let out a sharp bark of laughter, though it held no mirth. Mance looked as though he were reevaluating everything he knew. Val's eyes sparkled with new interest. Among the Black brothers, Qhorin finally drew a slow breath, while Mormont muttered under it, "Gods help us." The wildlings standing at the edges of the circle muttered among themselves, wide-eyed. At length, Mance cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. "If this is true, then everything changes. You say you could claim the throne. Would you, boy? Or are you just spinning tales to avoid war?" Jon's heart hammered. "I don't know, but if the realm recognized me, I could declare that the free folk needn't bend the knee in the old way. I could grant them lands so long as they stand with the realm against the others. No one else has a right to do that without forcing them to kneel to a foreign king." Mance studied Jon's face intently. "You're serious? If you were crowned, you'd allow us to cross without kneeling? You'd treat us as free folk, not as subjects to be taxed and oppressed." Jon swallowed. "I would. We'd negotiate terms, but I'd recognize your freedom. I only ask that you recognize my right to lead the realm in its war against the others. If you cross, you must help us fight for all humankind." Rattleshirt let out a derisive snort. "Talk is cheap. You say you're a dragon prince. Where's your proof? Show us your crown or your dragons." Anger flared in Jon, but he reined it in. "I have no crown. My father's line was almost wiped out. But ask Master Aemon at Castle Black. He's a Targaryen, he can confirm. Ask the Lord Commander, who suspected the truth for some time." He cast a glance at Mormont, who stood rigid, torn between shock and a sense of duty. "And if you'd look closely, you might see rigor in my face. Or so I've been told." Pregnant paws stretched. Mormont at last stepped forward, sounding hoarse. "Yes, it's true. I counseled him to keep it hidden. The realm is too broken, too distrustful. His claim could spark new wars. But we stand on the edge of the end times, Mance. If this is the only way to unite men, so be it." Qhorin nodded slowly, adding, "I suspected, but prayed it would never need to be spoken." The camp erupted into a clamor of exclamations. Wildlings pressed closer, some jeering, some exclaiming in awe, others scoffing. Mance raised his arms, calling for order. "Enough!" he roared. Silence gradually fell. He turned to Jon once more. "If you are truly Rhaegar's son, you might unite the kneelers, yes. But do you have the strength to do it? To stare down the lords and queens and usurpers?" Jon took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of countless gazes upon him. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know I must try, because the dead are coming for us all. And if we don't unite, none of us will survive." Mance locked eyes with him, and for a moment, Jon sensed the man's deep wariness but also a stirring hope. Slowly, Mance nodded. "Then perhaps it's time the world learned the truth. We free folk will stand with you, Jon Targaryen or Jon Stark or whatever you name yourself, if you'll stand by your promise that we needn't kneel." Tormund let out a booming laugh. "I always wanted to fight alongside a dragon prince, if only to see the look on the crows' faces." Rattleshirt scowled, but kept silent. Val smiled, a fierce glint in her eyes. The Black brothers behind Mormont exchanged uncertain glances, and Qhorin's expression was unreadable. Jon felt like the earth had shifted beneath his feet, as if 1,000 new paths had opened before him, each more perilous than the last. Mormont took a long, ragged breath. "Then let us return to Castle Black, to the lords who might still listen, and we will tell them that Jon Snow is not a Snow at all. The realm will have to decide if it will follow him. Gods help us." Jon bowed his head. "Yes, Lord Commander." His voice was quiet, trembling with the enormity of what he had unleashed. He thought of Sam, of the old books that spoke of Targaryen kings and the prophecies of Azor Ahai. He thought of Robb, who might see him as a rival now, not a brother. He thought of Daenerys Targaryen across the narrow sea, who might see him as a threat or an ally. He wondered if the dragons she supposedly commanded would heed his blood. Somewhere beyond the camp, a cold wind rose, rattling the pine branches. In that hush, Jon felt as though the gods themselves watched, waiting to see if this gamble would bring salvation or ruin to Westeros. He ran a hand absently over Ghost's fur. "I will do whatever it takes," he murmured, uncertain if he spoke to Mance, to the old gods, or to himself. So began the next phase of his journey, a world in which Jon Snow, the boy who once dreamed of honor and acceptance, would stand revealed as a Targaryen prince amid the onrushing tide of war and the shadow of the dead. There would be no going back, only forward into the storm, and in that storm he would discover just how heavy a crown could be, even if it rested invisibly on his head.